The third neural collar failed at the top of the shift, and Subwarden Merck felt it fail the way you feel a bone go, a small wrong lurch, and then the whole day tilting. He was on the observation gantry when it happened, 40 measures above the vault floor, both his forward eyes on the readout and his 2 lateral eyes on the thing in the pit. The readout said the collar was holding. The thing in the pit said otherwise. It had gone still, not the still of a sedated animal, but the still of something that has decided, and then it rolled one shoulder, unhurried, and the collar came apart across its neck in a bright spray of filament and burst servos. "Clamp it," Merck said, "now. All of them." Below him, the floor crew were already running, which was the only competent thing about the morning. Mag clamps fired from the 8 pillars ringing the pit, magnetic cables snapping taut across the beast's flanks, and for a breath the cables held, humming, and Merck let himself believe the breath would become a minute, and the minute an hour, and the hour a shift in which nobody else died. The beast leaned into the cables. It did not thrash. That was the part none of the reports ever captured, the part that made the young keepers resign. It never thrashed. It leaned, the way a person leans on a door they intend to open, patient and total, and the 8 pillars groaned in their sockets, and one of them tore free of the floor with a sound like the station breaking a tooth. "Off the floor," Merck said into the core channel, flat, because flat was the only register that moved conquered handlers when the alternative was screaming. "Everyone off the floor. Vol, get your people to the blast line." The daylight did not help. That was the cruel joke of the Kesarine vaults. The architects had built them under a great fused glass dome so that Avril's white noon came down through the atmosphere processors and filled the containment halls with clean, honest, horizontal light, all cyan and pale gold, the light of a garden. The dome was supposed to keep the specimens calm. It kept the visitors calm. It made the pamphlets photograph well. It did nothing for the beast, which had come off a world where the sun was a red coal and the shadows had teeth, and stood now in the middle of that beautiful light like a hole punched in it. Merck had 4 eyes and had learned, over 60 years, to trust the 2 he wasn't using. His forward pair watched the beast take a second pillar apart. His lateral pair caught Keeper Vol not running. "Vol!" The keeper was frozen at the edge of the floor, harness half-clipped, staring down into the pit with the specific paralysis of someone doing arithmetic he'd sworn he'd never do again. Vol had been on the retrieval team 11 days ago. Merck had signed the forms for the 2 handlers Vol hadn't been able to retrieve. There had been very little in the containers. "Keeper Vol, move to the blast line. That is a direct order." Vol moved. The beast watched him move, turned its great flat head and tracked him the whole way, unhurried, the way a thing watches something it has already filed under later, and then turned back to the pillars, because the pillars were the thing between it and the door was the only subject that had ever interested it. Merck keyed the emergency directorate line. It answered on the first pulse, which told him someone up the chain had been waiting for exactly this call, which told him the morning was going to be worse than a dead collar. Kesarine Annex, Subwarden Merck reporting a class absolute containment event, specimen 9, all restraint systems compromised, requesting. "Requesting nothing," said the voice on the other end. Cool, dry, directorate accented, a voice that had never once in its life been off the floor when the floor gave way because it had never once in its life been on the floor. "Requesting is finished, Subwarden. Hold your position. The overseer is already inbound." The line closed. Below, the beast pulled the 3rd pillar out of the ground, examined it for a moment as though it might be edible, and set it down. Then it lay down. In the middle of the wrecked floor, in the beautiful dead light of the dome, the galaxy's most dangerous war beast lay down with its chin between its forepaws and closed its eyes. And every alarm in the annex kept screaming, and not one of them was for the beast, because the beast was resting, and nothing in the Conquered's long catalogue of fears was more frightening than that. Merck stood on the gantry and watched it rest and understood, with the clean, flat certainty that had made him a good containment officer and a poor sleeper, that they were going to kill it. Not because they could, because they had run out of the courage required not to. The overseer's cutter came down through the dome lock 2 hours later, and by then the annex smelled of scorched insulation, and the particular ozone of a stasis generator run past its rating, and the beast was still resting, and 3 separate specialist teams had come and gone from the gantry, with the expressions of physicians leaving a room. Director Overseer Salin Dree of the Weapons Directorate was tall even for an Asun, the great pale crest of bone over her skull filed and lacquered to a dull gleam, and she crossed the gantry without looking at the pit, which Merrick noted, because everyone looked at the pit. First-timers looked out of fear. Veterans looked out of respect. People who didn't look were people who had already decided the thing in the pit was a number. Subwarden, she did not offer the wrist touch, walk me through the failure. 3 restraint generations in 14 days, Merrick said. Neural collar, mag clamp array, stasis lattice, each held for a shorter interval than the last. It is not defeating the systems by force. It is studying them. Animals don't study. This one does. He said it without heat. He had stopped saying it with heat around the 40th report nobody read. We recovered it from a Karathi escarpment 9 years ago, adolescent, sole survivor of its cohort. Karoth is a grade 11 biosphere. The prey on Karoth learns your restraint pattern and dies once. The predators on Karoth learn your restraint pattern and remove it. Specimen 9 is a predator. Dree walked to the rail at last and looked down, and Merrick watched her face do the thing all their faces did. The small, involuntary lag between what the eye reported and what the training permitted. The beast was the length of a transit car and low to the ground, plated in overlapping dark scoot that ran to a deep bruised violet where the dome light struck it. And even resting, even with its eyes shut, it read as a decision the room had not yet finished making. The Directorate, Dree said, has invested a great deal in Specimen 9. I'm aware. An asset that cannot be directed is not an asset. It is a liability wearing an asset's price tag. She turned from the rail. You've had it 9 years, Subwarden. 9 years, 4 dead handlers, and it has never once responded to a command. Not a collar, not a goad, not a conditioning cycle. Correct. Correct. Then it is not a weapon. It is a very expensive way to lose personnel. She said this to the pit, not to him. I'm authorized to resolve the discrepancy. We have a lattice charge platform in the cutter's hold. Positioned above the pit, keyed to the specimen's signature, it delivers a terminal field in 0.4 seconds. Clean. No breach risk. I'd have it rigged by the evening cycle and the annex cleared of the write-down by tomorrow's. Merrick had known it was coming since the emergency line closed, and it still landed in him like cold water. You want to destroy it. I want to stop paying for it. Dree's crest caught the light. Sentiment is the most expensive line item in any budget, Subwarden. I don't carry it. Unless you can give me a reason, a real one, an operational one, that this animal is worth another handler's container, I'll have the platform rigged tonight. And that was the moment. Merrick would set it against the rest of his life afterward. The exact moment. The white noon coming down through the dome and Dree's crest gleaming, and the beast resting in its ruin. That was the moment the maintenance hatch at the base of the pit opened, and a human walked out onto the containment floor with a mop. Later, when the Conquered tried to reconstruct how it had been allowed to happen, the failure turned out to be almost insultingly small. The Kesarine vaults subcontracted their sanitation. Everyone did. It was menial, it was constant, and it was cheaper to hire it out to one of the soft-world client species than to pay core rates for scrubbing biofilm out of a drain. Humans came cheap. Humans came in a lot of the recent contracts, actually, a young species, 3 decades into the Conquered's registries, unremarkable, obliging, physically soft, useful for the jobs the member species had priced themselves out of. Nobody vetted the sanitation roster. Nobody thought to. The roster wasn't on the containment net at all. It was on the facility's net, a different system with a different alarm tree, and when the annex went to class absolute lockdown and every core channel lit red, the facility's net had simply logged it as a scheduled hazard cycle and pushed the human's shift back 40 minutes and then, when the 40 minutes elapsed, pushed her in. Her badge said DULAC, W Contract Sanitation Tier 3 cleared for corridors and drains, not cleared for the floor. Nobody was cleared for the floor. The floor was where handlers died. She was small. That was Merrick's first thought, arriving a full breath before alarm, because the beast was the length of a transit car, and the human came up perhaps to the height of its resting shoulder, and she was built like nothing that had any business in the same enclosure, narrow, soft-skinned, dark hair scraped back under a cap, a shapeless gray coverall 2 sizes too big, a mop over one shoulder and a wheeled bucket she was dragging one-handed over the buckled floor plates because the wheels kept catching in the seams. She was frowning at the wheels. She was not, in any measurable way, frowning at the beast. Merrick's hand was already on the railcom. Floor, there is a civilian on the floor. 9 is. 9 was up. It came off the ground without the wind up any conquered animal would have needed. No gather, no rise. It was resting, and then it was standing. All of that length and mass simply present and oriented. And its head came down and around toward the small soft thing that had walked into its enclosure. And Merrick's 4 eyes all reported the same thing at once, which was that they were about to watch a 5th container get filled, and that this one would be small. Dree said something. Merrick didn't hear it. The human looked up from her wheels. She saw the beast, all of it, the length and the plate and the great flat murdering head now lowered to within a body's reach of her. And she did the single most incomprehensible thing anyone on that gantry had ever witnessed a living creature do in the presence of Specimen 9. She sighed. "There you are," she said. Her voice came up through the floor pickups, thin and unbothered and faintly annoyed, the voice of someone finding a coworker they'd been looking for. "You made a mess again." And the galaxy's most dangerous war beast, the thing that had studied 3 generations of restraint apart, that had emptied 4 containers, that had leaned on the station until it broke a tooth, lowered its great head the rest of the way down, and pressed its flat brow, very gently, into the middle of the small human's chest, and went still. Not the still of deciding. The other still, the one the core had no file for. Nobody on the gantry breathed. Dree had stopped moving entirely, crest frozen mid-gleam. On the floor, the human staggered half a step under the weight of the head against her, planted her feet, and Merrick watched it happen and did not believe it happening, reached up with her free hand and scratched the beast along the ridge of scoot above its eye, the way you'd scratch anything, the way you'd scratch a thing you'd known for years, and the beast leaned into it and made a low sound that came up through the pickups as a rumble low enough to shiver the gantry rail under Merrick's hand. "You're okay," the human said to the war beast in the tone you'd use on a nervous transit passenger. "You're okay, big idiot. Look at this floor." Merrick became aware that his own translator had been rendering the human's words this whole time, and that the core channel was silent because every officer on it was listening to a sanitation contractor Tier 3 call the Concord's most lethal asset a big idiot, and scratch its eye ridge while it leaned its killing weight into her like a domestic animal starved for it. Beside him, very quietly, in a voice that had lost all of its directorate cool, Director Overseer Salin Dree said, "What is that? What is that human?" That, Merrick said, and found his own voice had gone strange, is the sanitation contractor. That is not a sanitation contractor. On the floor, the human had put her mop down. She was murmuring something the pickups couldn't quite resolve, one hand flat on the side of the beast's jaw, and the beast had folded, there was no other word, folded itself down around her, the enormous plated length of it curving to put its bulk between the small human and the wrecked pillars, between her and the pit walls, between her and every direction a threat had ever come from, and it lay down again with its chin near her feet and its eyes half shut, and every line of it. For the first time in 9 years of conquered custody, at rest. The beast had not gentled for a collar. It had not gentled for a goad, a cycle, a stasis lattice, or 4 handlers who died trying. It had gentled for a small, tired human with a mop in under 3 seconds because she had told it that it was okay. Merrick looked at the terminal charge cutter sitting in the dome lock, keyed and waiting, and felt the day tilt a second time, in the other direction. They got her off the floor eventually. It took a while, because nobody wanted to be the one to walk down and do it, and because the human Dulac W Tier 3 declined to hurry. Merrick went down himself. It was his floor. He had signed the forms for the ones who died on it. He would not send a keeper to walk the length of it toward a resting 9 when he was standing right there with functioning legs. He came off the gantry stairs and out onto the buckled plates, and the beast's near eye rolled to track him, and he stopped, because 60 years of training were not nothing, and the human looked over her shoulder at him with mild curiosity. "You're the one who talks on the ceiling," she said. She meant the gantry calm. "You've got a nice voice for it, real calm." "You need to come away from the specimen," Merrick said. "His name's not Specimen." She said it without any particular defiance, the way you'd correct a small factual error. "I mean, it probably is on your paperwork, but that's not his name." "What is his name?" The human considered the beast. The beast considered nothing. It had shut its eyes. "I've been calling him Sonny," she said, "because of the light in here. He hates it, so it seemed like a good joke, and he needed one." She wiped her hands down the front of her coverall. "He doesn't like the dome, you know that. All that light coming down, no shade anywhere, no dark to put your back into. He comes from somewhere dark. Whoever built this room built it to make you people feel good, and it makes him feel skinned. That's half of why he keeps taking your pillars apart. He's trying to make a shadow." Merrick had been the sub-warden of the Kesarine Annex for 11 years. He had read every study the Directorate had commissioned on Specimen 9. He had authored 4 of them. Not one of them contained the sentence, "He's trying to make a shadow." "How long," he said slowly, "have you been talking to this animal?" The human Wren, her file would say Wren Dulac of a place called Earth, a place the Concord's atlas listed as a mid-grade temperate world of no strategic interest, pushed a loose strand of dark hair off her forehead and looked at him with the flat, patient, faintly amused steadiness that he would come over the following days. To understand was not calm at all in the Concord sense, not the trained absence of fear, but something worse and older, the actual absence of it. The thing her whole, soft-looking species carried under the skin like a second skeleton. "Since March," she said, "you've had a shift schedule. I cleaned this wing on the schedule. He's the only one down here who ever says hello." Above them, on the gantry, Director Overseer Salandri stood with her crest gleaming in the beautiful dead light of the dome, and did not order the platform rigged, because she had come to the Kesarine vaults to resolve a discrepancy, and had instead discovered a far larger one, and the second most dangerous thing in the Concord's catalog after Specimen 9 was a discrepancy the Directorate could not price. The Directorate did not, in the end, rig the platform that evening. This was not mercy. Merrick knew Dree well enough by the second hour to know she did not carry mercy any more than she carried sentiment. She told him so, and he believed her. What she carried was appetite, and the human on the floor had just placed in front of her a thing the whole weapons directorate had spent 9 years and 4 handlers failing to obtain: a lever on Specimen 9. "We were going to destroy an asset because it could not be directed," Dree said. They were in the annex briefing cell, the 3 of them and a directorate aide taking record, and through the cell's long window the dome light was going the deep gold of Avril's late afternoon, and down in the pit the beast lay in the one long shadow the standing pillars threw, in the only shade in the room. And Merrick understood now that it had spent 9 years chasing that shade across the floor as the sun moved, and had never once been given a reason for its behavior in any report, because no one had ever asked the question the human had answered in her first sentence. And it transpires the asset can be directed. It simply requires the correct interface. She's not an interface, Merrick said. Everything is an interface, Sub-Warden. It's only a question of whether you found the port. Dree's forward eye fixed on the human, who was sitting in the briefing cell's guest seat with a cup of Concord Field ration tea she had accepted without complaint and was drinking without expression, still in her too large coverall, her mop and bucket left down on the floor because the beast had planted a forepaw on the mop when they tried to take it and no one had cared to argue. Contractor Dulac, you formed a bond with the specimen. I don't know what that means the way you mean it, Wren said. I've been nice to him. Nobody else was. He's a good boy who's been having a very bad decade. He has killed 4 trained handlers. Yeah, Wren drank her tea. You put 4 trained handlers in a small room with a scared animal from a death planet and told them to boss it around. That's not the animal's fault, that's a hiring problem. She set the cup down. You want to know the difference between me and them? I didn't want anything from him, that's it. That's the whole secret you're all going to spend the next month writing up. Every single one of you who's ever gone down there wanted him to be something. A weapon, a number, a win. He can feel that. Anything born on a world like his can feel that. It's the first thing you learn or you don't get to grow up. I just came down to do the floors and I said hello because it's polite. And he'd never had that, not once in 9 years. She looked at Merrick, not Dree, when she finished. That's not a bond. That's just the bare minimum. You people set the bar so low a janitor tripped over it. The directorate aide had stopped recording. Merrick noticed. He didn't say anything. Dree's crest did a slow thing that Merrick had learned meant the Asum was recalculating. Whatever it is, she said, it is now a directorate asset, and so, Contractor Dulac as of this moment are you. Wren Dulac took the news that she was now the property of a galactic weapons directorate about as well as she took everything else, which was to say she finished her tea. No, she said. It isn't an offer, Dree said. I heard you. I'm still saying no. She stood and gathered nothing because she had nothing and looked around the briefing cell as though checking she hadn't left a rag anywhere. I've got a contract. Tier 3, corridors and drains, 40-hour cycle, and it pays about 1/3 of what you'd pay one of your own people to hold a mop, which is why I'm the one holding it. You want to talk to somebody about my status, you talk to Nabatine Facilities Group. They're the ones who own the contract. I just work here. You are the only living creature the specimen tolerates. That's Nabatine's problem now too, sounds like. Charge them extra. Wren went to the cell door. It didn't open for her, because a directorate aide had keyed it shut, and she stood in front of it with her back to the room and her shoulders very slightly dropped, and Merrick, watching, saying nothing, because it was not his floor up here. This was the directorate's cell and the directorate's discrepancy. Saw the exact moment the young human understood that the door was not going to open, and understood everything the closed door meant, and did not turn around. Open the door, she said, quiet. Contractor Dulac. I'm going to say it in a nice voice one more time because you've got a job to do and I don't hold that against you, Wren said to the door. Open the door. I want to go home. I've got a shift tomorrow and I'd like to sleep in my own bunk in the contractor block and eat my own food. I'm not a weapon, and I'm not a lever, and I'm not staying in this building 1 minute past my hours because a big lizard likes me. Open the door. Down in the pit, 4 levels below the briefing cell, on the other side of 2 blast walls and a stasis threshold, and every containment measure the Kessarine vaults could bring to bear, Specimen 9 stood up. There were no cameras on it in that moment that Merrick was watching. He didn't need cameras. He felt it, the whole annex felt it, the way you feel a large mass shift in a ship. A low structural note that came up through the floor of the briefing cell and stood the fine hairs up along his dorsal ridge, and every one of the pit alarms went off at once, and the directorate aide's board lit red, and Dree turned to the window in time to see, on the pit feed, the beast oriented itself toward the ceiling, toward the briefing cell, toward the human standing at the closed door 4 levels up whom it could not see and could not smell and could not possibly have known was distressed, and which knew anyway, the way the alarm on the facility's net had known nothing, and the beast that everyone had spent 9 years calling an animal knew everything. It did not thrash, it leaned. It put one forepaw on the pit wall and it leaned, and the pit wall was rated to hold it and had held it for 9 years, and it began, patiently, totally to fail. "Open the door," Dree said to the aide. The aide opened the door. Wren walked out, and down in the pit, the instant she was moving, the instant the small distressed thing that the beast had decided 9 years of trained handlers were not worth as much as, was untrapped and moving freely again. The beast took its paw off the wall and lay back down in its shadow, and the alarms wound down one by one, and the annex settled, and Merrick stood in the ruined quiet of the briefing cell and revised, silently, every threat assessment he had ever filed on Specimen 9. It was not the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy, because it could take a station apart. It was the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy because it had decided, entirely on its own, in under 3 seconds, on the floor of a dome that had been built to make it feel skinned, exactly one thing in all of conquered space that it would take a station apart to protect. And that thing had a mop and a 40-hour contract and had just walked out the door. Dree watched the pit feed for a long moment. When she turned back, the appetite in her had reorganized itself into something colder and more patient, and Merrick liked it a great deal less. "Contractor Dulac may go home tonight," she said. "Rescind the conscription order. Draft a consulting engagement instead, voluntary, compensated, at core handler rates." She said core handler rates the way another person might say a swallowed insult, and put a facilities net trace on her shift schedule. "I want to know exactly how this happened. I want every minute of contact between that human and that specimen, from the beginning." "The beginning was March," Merrick said. "Then find me March." They found March. It took the Annex Records Division 2 days to pull it, because the footage lived on the facility's net, which nobody had ever thought to cross-reference against the containment net, which was the whole reason a Tier 3 contractor had been able to walk onto the floor in the first place. The facility's net kept its cameras for insurance, slip hazards, spilled documentation, contractor liability, and it kept them cheaply, low frame rate, no audio, angled at the floors because the floors were what got mopped. But it kept them. And so the Conquered got, at last, its answer, in 11 weeks of grainy, silent, low-frame footage of a human mopping a corridor. Merrick watched all of it. He told himself it was diligence. It was not entirely diligence. The first week, she doesn't go near the pit gallery. She does the corridors on her schedule, Tier 3, corridors and drains, and the pit gallery is at the end of the east run, a long window of rated glass looking down into containment, and she mops up to it and mops away from it and does not stop. In the footage, her badge catches the light each time she turns. DULAC, W. The second week, she stops. It's nothing. It's 4 seconds. She's mopping the gallery run and she stops at the window and looks down, the way anyone would look down at the galaxy's most dangerous war beast if they found themselves alone with a window and a slow shift, and then she goes back to mopping. But the next night she stops again. And the night after that she stops and she stays, mop propped against the glass, and she's doing something with her mouth, and the facility's cameras have no audio, so Merrick will never know what she said to it that second week, only that she said something, alone, at the end of a long shift, to a thing 4 handlers had died trying to command. And down in the pit, on the containment feed that no one had thought to sink until now, the beast which spent its nights moving, always moving, chasing the one shadow around the floor and testing the walls, and never, in 9 years of night footage, holding still after dark, the beast comes to the wall under the gallery window, and lies down, and looks up. Merrick synced the two feeds and watched the human and the beast look at each other through a rated glass window for 11 weeks at low frame rate with no sound. And somewhere in the 4th week, he stopped taking notes. She brought it things. That was against every regulation the annex had, and it was so small no regulation had imagined forbidding it. A contractor's rations were a fixed dry block. She'd break off a corner and set it on the gallery sill, where the beast could never reach it and never tried to, and leave it there. And it was gone by her next shift because the annex's cleaning drones ate anything organic, and Merrick knew that and she probably didn't. And it didn't matter, because the point had never been for the beast to eat it. The point was the offering. The point was that in 11 weeks one being in conquered space had come to the glass and left something and asked for nothing. And the beast, the predator, the survivor, the soul-grown cub of a grade 11 world, where the first thing you learned was who wanted something from you, had done the arithmetic that 4 handlers with goads and collars had never let it finish, and had arrived at a sum it had presumably given up on somewhere back on the red escarpments of Karoth, which was: this one is not a threat, and this one is not a user, and this one therefore is mine. Dree watched the footage too. She watched it the way she watched everything, for the port, for the lever, for the line item. When it was done, she sat for a moment with her filed crest catching the last of the dome gold through the record cell window, and she said, 11 weeks. We spent 9 years and the biosciences budget of 3 member worlds. She spent 11 weeks and a corner of her lunch. Yes, Merrick said. Write it up, Dree said. All of it. The approach interval, the contact posture, the offering behavior, the vocal register. Every variable. If it can be documented, it can be protocoled. And if it can be protocoled, we don't need the human, we need the method. She stood. Find me the method, subwarden, and I'll have this asset directable inside a quarter. And contractor Dulac can go back to her drains with a bonus and my thanks. Merrick said, yes, director, because that was the answer that kept his floor, and did not say the thing he had understood somewhere in the 4th week of watching a human say nothing he could hear to a beast that had waited all night to hear it, which was that Dree had misfiled the variable. She thought the method was the approach interval and the contact posture and the vocal register. She thought if you documented what the human did, you could do it too. But the human hadn't done anything. That was the whole and the entire secret, and it was going to cost the directorate a great deal to learn it, because the thing the beast had recognized was not a technique. It was the absence of one, and you cannot protocol an absence. You cannot draft a young species' bone-deep lack of fear and lack of appetite into a core handbook and issue it to a keeper on a lanyard. Merrick had 4 eyes and had learned to trust the 2 he wasn't using, and both of the ones he wasn't using were on Director Overseer Salin Dree as she left the record cell, and both of them were telling him the same thing, which was that this was going to end with someone trying to take the human away from the beast to prove they didn't need her, and that it was going to go very badly, and that he should start now, quietly, deciding whose floor he was actually standing on. Merrick went down to ask her about the footage himself, because he wanted, for once, to hear the answer from the person instead of the file. He found her in the gallery at the end of her shift, mopping, because the consulting engagement had not changed the fact that Nabatine owned her hours, and the floors did not clean themselves for anyone's discrepancy. He asked her why she had stopped at the window that 2nd week. It had been nagging at him. The 1st week she mopped past it, and the 2nd week she stopped, and he wanted to know what had changed, because if a thing changed, there was usually a reason, and he had spent 9 years looking for reasons in the wrong creature. Nothing changed, Wren said. That's the boring answer. 1st week I was new and I kept my head down because you keep your head down when you're new, especially out here, especially doing what I do. 2nd week I wasn't new anymore. That's all. I got comfortable enough to look up. She wrung the mop. I took the contract because it paid a berth off-world and I wanted off-world. My town back home isn't much. Weather and a grain co-op and a lot of people who have never once left the county. I wanted to see something. Everybody laughed the girl who's going to space to mop floors, and they weren't wrong. It is mopping floors, but I've mopped floors in a place with a sky made of glass and a sun that isn't mine and a lizard the size of a bus who says hello. And nobody in that co-op will ever be able to say that, so. She shrugged. It was worth it. It's still worth it, even with your director trying to buy me. You weren't afraid of it, Merck said, the second week. Alone at the end of a shift at a window with the deadliest thing this facility holds. You looked up and you weren't afraid. I keep telling you people that and you keep not believing it, so let me try it a different way. She leaned on the mop. Where I'm from, there's a kind of quiet that means the storm's coming. You learn it as a kid. Everything goes still and green and the birds stop and the air gets heavy, and every animal that lives knows to get low and get inside, and if you don't know that quiet, you don't grow up. That's home. That's the death world your assessor's going to reclassify us as once somebody reads the file. She looked down into the pit at the beast in its shade. First time I looked up and saw him, I recognized the quiet, not on him, in him. He had it. That still, heavy, get low quiet all the time for 9 years, because he'd been waiting 9 years for a storm that never stopped coming, which was you people every shift. And I know that quiet. I grew up inside it, so I didn't see a monster. I saw somebody bracing for weather that hadn't let up in 9 years, and I did the thing you do for anybody caught out in it. I said, hey, you okay? Come in out of it a minute. That's not brave, that's just what you say. Anybody from a storm world would have said it. You people just don't have the storms, so you never learned the words. Merck had nothing to say to that, so he said nothing, which was, he was learning from her, frequently the correct amount to say. He watched her finish the gallery run and stop at the window and tell the beast good night, and he went back up to the gantry, and he understood a little more of the thing he had understood in the 4th week of the footage, which was that the conquered had spent 31 years thinking of humanity as a species that had gotten lucky with an easy world and grown soft on it, and had never once considered the possibility that stood in front of him now with a mop. That the humans were not soft because their world was easy. They were calm because their world was hard, and calm was the only thing that had ever survived it, and they had brought that calm out into a galaxy full of species who had mistaken it for weakness, and were, one contract at a time, one window at a time, one storm-quiet hello at a time, about to find out. The Corps wrote it up. Of course they wrote it up. It was the one thing the conquered could always be relied upon to do. They called the approach interval the threshold cadence, and they measured the human's mop-to-glass distance to the quarter measure and drew it in the manual. They called the contact posture, the way she stood side-on to the pit, never square, never staring, shoulders dropped the open flank, and they had a keeper practice it in front of a mirror. They called the offering of the ration corner the left portion, and they wrote 3 pages on its ceremonial function, and got the ceremonial function completely wrong, because there wasn't one, because it was just a girl leaving part of her lunch for a lonely animal, but 3 pages read better in a directorate brief than a girl leaving part of her lunch. And they took the thing she said to it every night at the glass, the thing the silent cameras had never caught, that Merck only got because he finally, on the 9th day, simply asked her, and they made that a protocol too. I tell him good night, Wren said when he asked. They were in the gallery. She was mopping. She mopped even now, even as a compensated consultant at Corps handler rates, because the contract was still live and Nabatine still owned her hours, and she said the floors didn't clean themselves for anybody's discrepancy. That's it. End of my shift, I stop at the glass, I say good night big idiot, sleep in your shadow, and I go home. 11 weeks. Same 6 words near enough. Down in the pit, the beast lay under the gallery in its evening shade with one eye up at her. The directorate wishes to formalize the phrase, Merck said, as a settling command. They're calling it the nightward assurance. Wren stopped mopping. She looked at him for a moment and then she laughed, a short, tired, entirely genuine laugh, the first he'd heard from her, and shook her head and went back to the floor. Sure they are, she said. The nightward assurance, you people, you'd carve a prayer out of me telling a dog good night. She wrung the mop. It's not a command. He's not settling because I said a word. He's settling because the person who said the word is the one who leaves. When I go, he knows the day's over and nothing else is coming for him tonight. You could say your nightward assurance to him in my exact voice, and he'd take your arm off, because it was never the words. It was who was still standing there when the words were done. Merck wrote none of that in the manual. He kept it. There is a difference, he was learning, between the things you file and the things you keep. And he was, at 60, beginning very late to learn which was which. The directorate tested the method before it trusted it, which was the one genuinely competent instinct Dree had, and the test cost them nothing but their last remaining illusion, which in Merck's experience was the most expensive thing a competent instinct ever bought. The premise of the test was reasonable. If the core had documented the human's technique, the threshold cadence, the open flank, the left portion, the nightward assurance, then the technique should be reproducible, and if it was reproducible, then any trained keeper could execute it. And if any trained keeper could execute it, then the directorate did not need the human at all. And the whole inconvenient discrepancy of a soft-world contractor holding a lever on a weapons asset could be dissolved back into a core procedure and filed. So Dree selected a keeper, not Vol. A younger one, a keeper named Ish, who had drilled the documented postures in front of the mirror until they were clean. And she had him approach the gallery window at the documented interval, side on, shoulders dropped, a ration corner in his hand, and say the documented 6 words in the documented register at the documented hour. Merck watched it from the gantry. He had asked to be allowed to stop it and been refused, and so he did the next thing, which was to make certain the blast threshold was primed and the gallery was clear, and that when it went wrong, as he knew to the marrow of him it would go wrong, it went wrong into an empty room. Keeper Ish did everything right. That was the part Merck entered into the record afterward in the plainest language he could find, because it mattered, because the directorate would want to believe the keeper had erred, and there had to be a line in the file that said he had not. Ish stood side on. His shoulders dropped. He set the ration corner on the sill at the correct distance. He said, in a creditable approximation of a young human woman's gentle register, "Good night," and the rest of it into the pit. The beast came to the wall beneath the gallery. It always came to the wall at that hour. The hour was hers, and it had learned the hour. It came to the wall and it looked up. Expecting the window it had looked up at every night for 11 weeks, and it found instead a conquered keeper in the correct posture, holding a corner of ration and making the correct sounds. And Merck watched the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy do arithmetic that took it less than a second, because it had done this arithmetic its whole life, and its whole life had depended on doing it fast. It read the keeper. It read the dropped shoulders that were dropped on purpose, and the side-on stance that was side-on purpose, and the ration corner offered because a manual said to offer it. And underneath all of the correct postures, it read the one variable the manual could not fake and had not even known to try, which was that the keeper wanted something. The keeper wanted the beast to settle. The keeper wanted the technique to work. The keeper wanted, standing at that window with his career and his director watching, very badly, for the animal to lie down. And the animal came off a world where wanting something you hadn't earned was the smell that told you which thing in the dark was about to try to take it from you. And it had spent 9 years drowning in that smell off 4 handlers, and it knew that smell the way Merck knew his own name. The beast did not settle. It went still, the deciding still, and it put one forepaw against the wall beneath the correct keeper making the correct sounds, and it leaned, patiently, totally, and Merck gave the order that pulled Keeper Ish off the gallery at a run, and the gallery was empty, exactly as he had made certain it would be, when the beast finished disagreeing with the wall. No one was hurt. That was the whole mercy of it, and Merck had engineered the whole mercy of it. But the record now held, in the plainest language he could find, the sentence the directorate least wanted and most needed. The documented method, executed correctly, produced a containment event. The technique did not transfer. There was no technique. There had only ever been her. Dree did not accept it. People like Dree did not accept a finding on one trial. That was, Merck would grant her a defensible discipline, and it was also the thing that led her to the second test, which was worse, and which taught the annex the thing the first test had only implied. If the variable was not the technique, Dree reasoned, then perhaps the variable was merely the species. Perhaps any human would do. The beast had bonded to a human. Humans were interchangeable to the conquered in roughly the way ration blocks were interchangeable. Get another one, run the same approach. And if it settled, then the directorate's problem was not one irreplaceable contractor but a renewable resource 900,000 strong. So Dree pulled a second human off the Nabatine roster, a contractor named Petro, older than Ren, eager, a man who had heard about the bonus attached to the strange assignment in the containment wing and had volunteered for it, and she had him coached in the postures and walked him to the window. And here the annex learned the thing, because Petro was not Ren, and the difference was not that he was the wrong shape or said the wrong words. He said the words beautifully. The difference was that Petro wanted the bonus. Petro wanted to be the one who could do the thing the Tier 3 girl could do, wanted the direct engagement and the credits and the story he would tell, and he stood at the window side-on with his shoulders dropped, and every posture correct, and underneath it he wanted, the same as the keeper had wanted, only human this time. And the beast came to the wall and looked up and read a second warm, soft thing that had come to its window with an appetite, and it made the same arithmetic and reached the same sum. And Merck pulled the second human off the gallery at a run into a room he had, again, made certain was empty. "It is not the species," Merck said to Dree afterward in the briefing cell, and he did not trouble to keep the thing out of his voice this time, whatever the thing was. Two humans, director, the same postures, the same words, the same hour. One of them the beast would take a station apart to protect, and the other one it read in under a second and rejected, and the only difference between them, the only variable your method cannot document, cannot coach, and cannot renew off a labor roster, is that one of them wants something and the other one doesn't. You keep testing for the wrong constant. It is not the technique and it is not the species. It is the wanting. She is the only creature that has come to that window in 9 years and wanted nothing. And you cannot manufacture that, because the instant you assign someone to want nothing, you have given them something to want, which is to succeed at wanting nothing, and the beast smells it, and it is over. He let that land. There is exactly one interface, director, and it is one specific young woman, and the reason she works is the reason she can never be owned, and those are not two facts. They are the same fact, and you are going to break this entire building against it if you keep refusing to hear it. Dree heard it, Merck could see her hear it. And he watched her do the thing that made her dangerous, which was to accept the fact completely and then reason from it to exactly the wrong action. Because if there was one irreplaceable interface, then the interface was the asset, and an asset was a thing you secured, and a thing you secured was a thing you owned. And the whole doomed machinery of the demonstration began turning in her the moment she finally believed the truth Merck had spent 2 failed tests trying to make her believe. The demonstration was Dree's idea, and it was a good one, in the way that the worst ideas in Merck's experience were always good ones, logical, well-resourced, and built entirely on a premise that was wrong. The premise was that the beast was a weapon and the human was its trigger, and that if you had the trigger, you had the weapon, and a weapon that could not be shown to buyers was a weapon that could not be sold, and the whole 9-year, 3-world biosciences overrun could still, with the right demonstration, be turned from a write-down into a program. The directorate had clients. The directorate always had clients. Grade 11 Apex Biology, controllable on demand, deployable to a target. There were 7 member species and a dozen fringe polities who would open their treasuries for a live proof of that. So Dree scheduled a proof. She brought in a viewing delegation, 3 procurement officers off a Valor Consortium cruiser, a scaled thing from the Rift assemblies, a conquered budget adjutant with authority to reinstate the program. And she had the annex staff rig a demonstration cell off the main pit, a reinforced gallery with a target range, and a sacrificial drone rated to survive one pass, so the buyers could watch the pass, and then watch the drone not survive the second one. And she had Merrick bring the human and the beast, and told them the beast would be directed, on the human's word, to take the range. Merrick brought the human. He did not have a choice about that part. He'd spent 3 days looking for the choice and it wasn't there. The delegation was already assembled on the viewing gallery when he walked Ren in, and Merrick watched them see her, and watched the thing the niche of his whole career had taught him to watch for, which was the mockery. It came off them in a wave. The Valor procurement officers had crests and status plating, and a translator matrix that cost more than the contractor block Ren slept in. They looked at the small, soft human in the too large gray coverall, the mop nowhere in evidence because someone had finally taken it, and one of them said something that the delegation's shared channel rendered, helpfully, loudly, for the whole gallery to hear. "That, the trigger is that. We came for a weapons proof and they've brought us the help." The scaled thing from the rift laughed. It was a wet, clicking sound. "I've seen the specimen file, grade 11, and the interface is a soft-world drone species contract laborer. Is this a proof or a comedy, overseer? Does it settle the beast by scrubbing it?" Ren stood in the middle of the gallery in her coverall and let them say it. She had, Merrick had come to understand, an enormous and effortless capacity for letting people say it, for standing inside a room's contempt the way she'd stood inside the pit, side on, shoulders dropped, unbothered, waiting for the part where the room found out. She looked at the target range. She looked at the sacrificial drone. She looked at the door on the far side that led down into the demonstration cell where they would bring the beast, and Merrick saw her understand the whole shape of it, the pass, and the second pass, and the buyers and the treasuries, in about the time it took the rift thing to finish laughing. "No," she said. Dree had expected this. "Contractor Dulac. You want me to walk him out there and tell him to kill a drone so these people can imagine him killing a city?" Ren said it flatly, to the gallery, not to Dree. "So that you can rent him out, to them, to end up on somebody's escarpment on the wrong end of the exact thing that happened to him." She shook her head once. "No, I don't do that. I clean floors and I tell an animal good night. That's the whole list. Killing a drone to sell him into another 9 years isn't on it, and you can't make it be on it, because the entire reason he listens to me is that I've never once asked him to do a single thing, and the second I do, I'm just handler number 5, and you know what happened to the first 4. The gallery went quiet. Even the mockery went quiet, because the mockery had been built on the premise that the small soft thing was the help, and the small soft thing had just, without raising her voice, without standing square, without any of the postures the Corps had spent 9 years failing with, described the exact mechanism of the beast's obedience more precisely than any of the 4 studies Merrick had authored, and then declined to operate it. "Bring the specimen up," Dree said. Merrick turned, "Director." "Bring it up, Subwarden. Contractor Dulac has declined to direct it. Very well. We'll observe its behavior in proximity to a target without direction. That is also data. The buyers came for a proof. They'll have a proof of something." Her crest gleamed. "Perhaps a proof that the interface is unnecessary." That was the thing Merrick had been dreading since the record cell, arriving on schedule. Dree had decided the human was a variable she could eliminate. She was going to bring the beast up into a strange cell with a target and a delegation, and no shadow, and no good night, and no girl standing side-on at the glass. And she was going to find out whether the Corps' threshold cadence, and open flank and left portion and nightward assurance added up to control, or whether they added up to 11 pages of a young species' bone-deep lack of fear that could not be worn on a lanyard. Merrick already knew the answer. He'd known it in the 4th week of the footage. But knowing a thing and being made to demonstrate it to a room full of buyers are different weights, and the second one was about to come down on the annex, and on the 4 handlers worth of courage he had left, and on the small human standing in the middle of the delegation's contempt with her shoulders dropped, waiting, as ever, for the part where the room found out. "You don't want to do this," Ren said to Dree. Quiet, almost kind. It was the same voice Merrick realized that she used on the beast. "You're okay. Big idiot." It was the last warning voice, and none of them but Merrick knew it, because none of them had watched 11 weeks of footage and learned that this human only ever said a thing softly right before the thing she was warning about became unavoidable. "Sonny's fine down in the pit. He's got his shade, he's got his schedule, he's not hurting anybody as long as nobody's hurting me and nobody's dragging him somewhere new. You bring him up into a strange room to perform for strangers, and you take away the one thing that's kept this whole building standing for 11 weeks, which is that he trusts that I've got it handled. He is going to look around this room, and he is not going to see me being okay. He is going to see me surrounded. And then you're going to find out what he's for." She let that sit. "Don't bring him up, send everyone home. I'll go down and tell him good night and we all keep our arms." "Bring it up," said Director Overseer Salon Dree. They brought it up. Merrick gave the order himself, because if it was going to be given, he wanted it given by the one person in the annex who understood what it was ordering, and because the alternative was Vol giving it, and Vol had gone the gray-green of an Asun about to be sick, and Merrick would not do that to him a second time. The transfer went by the manual. The manual was good. The manual had been written over 9 careful years by people who had died writing it. Stasis threshold, transit cradle, magnetic containment on the cradle rails. The whole beast moved not by force. Force had never once moved it, but by patience, by opening the pit and letting it choose the one direction that wasn't a wall, the direction that happened because the core had built the route that way, to lead up toward the demonstration cell. The beast went. It went the way it did everything, unhurried studying, its great flat head swinging to read each new corridor as the cradle rails carried it up out of its shade and into the bright, honest, skinning light of the upper annex. Merrick watched it come up on the feeds, and he watched the human watch it come up, and he saw the exact moment the beast, riding the cradle into the demonstration cell, put its head up and found that it could not see the girl. The cell was reinforced. The viewing gallery was above and behind rated glass. Ren was up there in the gallery with the delegation, where Dree had put her, where the beast could not see her or reach her, and the beast came up into a strange, bright, shadeless room full of the smell of strangers and a target range and a sacrificial drone, and it could not find the one fixed point that 11 weeks had taught it to orient on. And Merrick watched, on the feed, the precise instant the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy went from resting to deciding. It did not thrash. Merrick could have wept later at how many of them still, even now, expected it to thrash, as though thrashing were the danger. It went still. It stood in the middle of the demonstration cell, and it went utterly still, and it turned its head, slowly, up toward the rated glass of the viewing gallery, toward the small, distressed shape it could not reach. And it read the room the way the human had told them it would. It saw the girl surrounded, it saw the strangers. It saw that no one down here was okay. And it began, patiently, totally, to disagree with the architecture. "It's studying the glass," someone in the delegation said, and the mockery had entirely gone out of the voice now. "Overseer, that glass is rated to." "The glass is rated to nothing this animal has ever leaned on," Merrick said, to the room flat, because flat was the only register that moved anyone when the alternative was screaming. "Director, send them out. Now. The gallery evacuates first. Get the buyers to the cutter." And Ren Dulac, standing in the middle of a delegation that had, 90 seconds ago, called her the help, stepped forward to the rated glass so the beast could see her, and put both her small, soft hands flat against it, and said, in the voice, the settling voice, the last warning voice, loud enough for the pickups and the whole gallery to hear. "Sonny, hey, I'm right here." Look at me, I'm right here and I'm okay, and I need you to do something for me, and it's the first thing I've ever asked you, so I need you to hear it. She kept her hands flat on the glass. The beast held on the other side of it, an arm's length and a rated pane away, all of that plated length gone still and oriented and deciding, and it looked at her small hands on the glass, and it looked at her face, and it held. I need you to not, Ren said. That's it. That's the whole ask. Not this room, not these people, not today. I've got it. I've got it handled. You settle, and I promise you on everything I've got that nobody moves you again, and nobody makes you perform, and you get your pit back and your shade back and your good night tonight same as always. But I need you to not. Right now for me. Nobody in the gallery breathed. Down in the cell, the galaxy's most dangerous war beast looked at the small human's hands on the glass, and lowered its head, and put its own flat brow against the pane, exactly opposite her hands, the rated glass the only thing between them, and it made the low sound that came up through the pickups as a rumble low enough to shiver the rail, and it did not lean on the glass. It rested against it. The demonstration cell held, the glass held. The delegation left quickly, in a silence that had nothing left of comedy in it, and the conquered budget adjutant left with them without a word to Dree. And the program, whatever the program had been going to be, walked out the dome lock in the persons of 3 procurement officers who had come for a weapons proof, and had received, instead, a proof of something none of them had a price for, and all of them, Merck suspected, would spend a long time not talking about. The sight of a soft-world contract laborer put her hands on a pane of glass and tell the deadliest thing in the catalog not to, and the deadliest thing in the catalog, on a world built to make it feel skinned, choosing her over every instinct 9 years of captivity had failed to break. Dree stood at the gallery rail for a long moment after the buyers had gone. Then she said, without turning, "Take the specimen back to the pit." "Director." "Take it back to the pit, Subwarden, and draft me a transfer order. If it cannot be demonstrated here, it will be evaluated at a directorate facility. Properly. Without the sanitation contractor and her floors and her good nights confounding the data." Now she turned, and the cold in her had gone all the way patient, all the way to the place past appetite where the truly dangerous decisions in the conquered got made in briefing cells by people who had never once been on the floor. The interface is a confound. We'll remove the confound and evaluate the asset clean. If the asset is controllable, we have a program. If it is not, her crest caught the last of the skinning light, then it is what I said it was on the first day, and the platform is still in the cutter's hold. She left. Ren took her hands off the glass. Down in the cell, the beast lifted its brow from the pane and looked up at her, and she looked down at it. And Merck, standing between them, understood that he had just watched the young human make the beast a promise. Nobody moves you again, that the directorate had, 90 seconds later in the same room, resolved to break. Merck pulled the human's world file that night. He told himself it was diligence. It was not diligence at all this time, and he had stopped lying to himself around the demonstration, so he noted the lie and pulled the file anyway. Earth. Registry age, 31 conquered years. Client species status, provisional. Biosphere grade, the file said 4. Mid-grade temperate, no strategic interest. Principal export to conquered space. Contract labor, agricultural product, and a category the registry clerk had filed under miscellaneous cultural, which on inspection turned out to be almost entirely recordings. The humans sold their stories, apparently, in enormous volume, to anyone who'd take them, which Merck set aside as the kind of soft-world eccentricity that explained the mid-grade rating and the cheap labor, and the general conquered consensus that the species was harmless and obliging, and priced correctly. Then he did the thing no registry clerk had done in 31 years, because there had never been a reason to, because the humans were polite and cheap, and sold you their stories and mopped your floors. He cross-referenced the biosphere data against the grade scale directly, instead of trusting the summary number. The summary number was wrong. It was not wrong by a little. Earth had been assessed by a survey contractor in the species' first year of contact, a fast pass box checking, and the contractor had rated the biosphere 4 on the strength of its temperate bands and its breathable air, and the fact that the dominant species had greeted the survey team with what the report called disarming friendliness and a gift of cooked food. Grade 4. Mid. No hazard note. And underneath the summary, in the raw biosphere data that no one had ever rolled up into the number, Earth ran gravity at the high edge of tolerance, an atmosphere thick enough to carry weather that routinely leveled the dominant species' own structures, a hydrosphere with pressure zones that crushed conquered survey drones, a biosphere that had put the dominant species through no fewer than 5 recorded mass extinction pressures, and produced, each time, survivors. And a dominant species that had evolved as an endurance pursuit predator, a thing that did not outrun its prey or outmuscle it but simply followed it, at a patient, unhurried, total pace, across distances that killed everything else, until the prey's heart gave out and the human, still walking, arrived. Grade 4. Merrick sat in the dark of his cell with the raw data open and read the endurance predator note 4 times and thought about the way the beast leaned on things. Patient, unhurried, total, the way you lean on a door you intend to open. He thought about a small, soft human dragging a bucket over a buckled floor, frowning at the wheels, walking the length of a corridor toward the deadliest thing in the catalog at exactly the same pace she'd walk it away. And he understood, at last and all at once, what the beast had recognized through 11 weeks of rated glass. It had not recognized a friend. Friend was the human word, the soft world word, the one Wren used because it was true from her side. From the beast's side it was something older and more exact. The beast had come off a grade 11 world, where the first thing you learned was who wanted something from you, and the second thing you learned was who was more patient than you, because the second thing was the thing that ate you. And it had spent 9 years among a species that wanted everything from it and had no patience at all, that goaded and rushed and collared and gave up, 4 handlers deep. And then one night at a window it had met a small soft thing from another death world entirely, a thing that wanted nothing and would, the beast could smell it, the beast could read it in the unhurried way she moved, simply keep coming, at that same total pace, forever, until the thing it was following gave out. And the beast, which had never in 9 years met anything it recognized as senior, had looked through the glass at the endurance predator that had walked up out of a 5-extinction world and decided to be polite to it, and had done the only sane thing a Karathi apex could do in the presence of a patience older than its own. It had lain down and looked up and waited to be told good night. Merrick closed the file. He sat for a while in the dark. Then he wrote a single line into his personal log, not the core log, the personal one, the one that was only things he kept and never things he filed. It read in full, "The Directorate is about to try to take an endurance predator's chosen ground away from it, over the objection of a second endurance predator, and it does not know that either of them is one. I have decided whose floor I am standing on." Grade 11, Wren said when he told her. She didn't laugh this time. She was quiet for a moment, wringing the mop out of habit though the floor was already clean, and then she said, "You know what's funny? We don't think of it that way. Home. You grow up there, it's just weather and traffic and the news. You don't walk around going, ah yes, the death planet." She hung the mop on the bucket. "But then you come out here and everybody's so careful. Everybody's got a rating for how scary their weather is and a treaty about who's allowed to feel afraid of what, and you realize, oh, we just don't. Not because we're brave. We never learned how. Where I'm from, if the sky's going to kill you, it kills you. And if it isn't, you go to work, and there's no third option where you stand around being afraid of it, because being afraid of it never once changed the sky." She looked down into the pit, at the beast in its evening shade. "That's what he likes about me. I finally figured it out listening to you. It's not that I'm nice. Lots of people are nice. It's that when I'm nice, I mean it all the way down because there's no fear underneath it taking a cut. He can tell. On his world you'd have to be able to tell, or you'd die of it." Yes, Merrick said. You people are going to take him away. She said it without turning, not a question. The Directorate has drafted a transfer order, a weapons evaluation facility in the Sarin Reach. They intend to sever the confound. He made himself use Dree's words so that Wren would hear exactly how the Directorate thought of her. They intend to cancel your contract, remove you from the annex, and evaluate the specimen without you present to determine whether it can be controlled by protocol alone. It can't. I know. You know and I know and Sonny knows. Wren turned around. She wasn't angry. Merrick had never once seen her angry, and he was beginning to understand that this, too, was the death world in her. That anger was a fear that had found a direction, and she simply didn't carry the fear, so the anger had nothing to stand on. What she had instead was worse. She had certainty. So the only ones who don't know are the ones with the order, which means it's going to happen anyway because it's always the ones with the order. She picked up her bucket. When? 8 days. The transport cradle has to be shipped from the Sarin Reach. It's rated heavier than anything the annex holds. 8 days, Wren nodded slowly. Okay. And she went back to her floors, because Nabatine still owned her hours and the contract, for 8 more days, was still live. And the one thing Merrick had learned you could rely on about the young endurance predator species from the mid-graded death world was that they went to work. The order to cancel Wren's contract came through on the 6th day, 2 days early, because Dree had decided that 8 days of continued contact was 6 days of continued confound, and that the clean evaluation would be cleaner still if the interface had already been gone a week before the transport arrived. It was elegant. It was efficient. It was, Merrick thought, reading it, the single most dangerous thing anyone had done in the annex since the human walked out onto the floor with a mop, and not one line of it involved the beast, which was exactly why the people who wrote it did not understand what they had done. Nabatine Facilities Group received a termination for convenience notice on Wren's Tier 3 contract, effective immediately, with a severance credit and a berth on the next labor rotation off Avril. Contractor Dulac, W., was to vacate the contractor block by end of cycle and would be escorted to the spaceport waiting area for the outbound rotation in the morning. Her annex credentials were revoked at 14:20. At 14:20, the badge that said DULAC, W stopped opening the gallery door. Merrick was in the pit gallery when it happened, because he had made sure to be, because he had decided whose floor he was standing on, and this was the first day the decision cost anything. He was standing beside Wren at the rated glass when her badge died against the reader with a flat, unimportant tone, and he watched her look at the dead badge, and look at the door, and look down into the pit at the beast in its shade, and he watched the young human understand that they had found a way to take her chosen ground without ever once touching the beast, by touching her instead, by simply canceling the contract of the endurance predator they'd mid-graded and shipping her off-world, and evaluating her animal clean. They're not moving him yet, she said, working it out. They're moving me first, so that when they do move him, I'm already gone, and there's no scene, and no glass with my hands on it, and no, she stopped. They're going to walk him up out of that pit into a transport cradle in 6 days, and I'm not going to be here, and nobody's going to tell him good night, and nobody's going to be okay, and he's going to look around a strange, bright room full of strangers for the one fixed point that's kept him from taking the annex apart for 11 weeks, and it's going to be gone, because they shipped it off-world on a labor rotation. She looked at Merrick. Do you know what he's going to do? Yes, Merrick said. So do they? No, Merrick said. That's the thing I have finally understood, Wren. They don't. They think the danger is the beast, and that if they manage the beast, the cradle, the stasis, the route, the manual, they manage the danger. They have spent 9 years and 3 worlds' budgets building a theory in which the beast is the variable and everything else is constant. They cannot see that you are the constant and the beast is the variable, because to see that they would have to have watched 11 weeks of a contractor mopping a floor and understood what they were looking at, and they are the kind of people who do not look at the floor, because they have never once been on it. He heard his own voice go flat, the register that moved people when the alternative was screaming, and realized he was, for the first time in his career, using it not to manage a beast but to tell the truth. They are going to remove the constant and manage the variable and call the result clean data, and it is going to cost them a great deal more than 4 handlers. Down in the pit, in its evening shade, the beast had lifted its head. It was looking up at the gallery, at the two of them at the glass, and Merrick understood that it had felt, somehow, across the dead badge and the termination notice and the labor rotation, the exact thing the facility's net had failed to feel on the first day, and the beast never once failed to feel, that its chosen ground was in distress. It rose. It came to the wall beneath the gallery, and it looked up, and it did not lean, because Wren was still there, still standing, still okay, and the not leaning was the whole of the thing the annex had been resting on for 11 weeks and was about to throw away to get clean data. 6 days, Wren said. And they've already killed my badge. She put her hand flat on the glass, and the beast put its brow against the wall beneath her, and Merrick stood beside the 2 Death World predators the Conquered had mid-graded and misfiled and decided to sever, and made quietly the second decision that would cost him something. They killed your annex credentials, he said. They did not kill mine. For 5 days, Merrick committed the smallest and most sustained insubordination of his career, and it consisted entirely of walking a human to a window. Wren's credentials were dead, his were not. So at the end of each cycle, when the annex went to its low night lighting, and the dome gold faded to the flat silver of Avril's short night, Subwarden Merrick walked down to the contractor block, where Wren was confined pending her labor rotation, and he signed her out under his own authority as a corps escort, which he was entitled to do, and which no one had thought to forbid. Because forbidding it would have required someone to imagine that a subwarden of the containment corps would spend his nights personally escorting a terminated Tier 3 sanitation contractor to a window so she could tell a war beast good night. And no one in the directorate had that much imagination, because no one in the directorate had ever been on the floor. She said the 6 words. Good night, big idiot, sleep in your shadow. The beast settled. The annex held. And Merrick walked her back to the contractor block and signed her in again, and did it the next night and the next, and told himself each time that he was managing a containment risk, which was true, and was not the reason, which he also by now knew. Keeper Vol caught them on the 3rd night. Merrick had half expected it. Vol had taken to lingering near the gallery after his shift, the way a man lingers near a thing he is afraid of and cannot leave. He came around the corner of the East Run, and found the subwarden and the terminated contractor at the raided glass and the beast below them settling into its shade. And he stopped, and his harness clip trembled the way it had trembled on the day the 3rd collar failed. Subwarden, Vol said, her credentials are revoked, yes. Merrick did not move from the glass. I'm aware, Keeper. She signed out under my authority as an escort. It's within regulation. That's not. Vol stopped. He looked at the window, at the human, at the beast below settling into the one shadow in the pit. Merrick watched him do the arithmetic, not the arithmetic of the containers this time, the other arithmetic, the one that had no forms for it, and watched him arrive somewhere. Vol had put 4 handlers in the ground. Vol had gone gray-green at the thought of giving the order to bring the beast up. Vol was, Merrick had always thought, the most broken of the annex's keepers, the one closest to resigning, the one the beast tracked longest when it tracked anyone. On the day the 3rd collar failed, Vol said slowly, it tracked me across the whole floor, the whole way to the blast line. I thought everyone thought it had marked me, filed me under later. He swallowed. It wasn't marking me, was it? No, Merrick said. It was. Vol's translator hunted for the word. It was watching whether I'd get clear. It tracked me to the line to see me make the line. He looked at the beast, at the small human above it, 4 handlers. And we were the ones who were dangerous. The whole time. We went down there wanting it to be a weapon so badly that it defended itself from us, and we filed the ones it defended itself from as heroes, and he couldn't finish. It waited 9 years for one person to come down and want nothing, Merck said. She came in 11 weeks ago. That is the entire story, Keeper. Everything else is us. Vol stood at the window for a while. Then he keyed his own credentials into the gallery log beside Merck's, a second course signature on the escort, and said, quietly, I'll walk the second half of the nights. So it's not all on you if they check the log. And that was how the annex acquired its resistance. Not a mutiny, nothing so grand, just 2 containment officers and a mop and a war beast and a small human from a death world, signing each other into a window at night so that a promise could be kept for 5 more days. The transport cradle arrived on the 5th day, 3 days early, and Merck understood the moment the Sarin Reach freighter came down through the dome lock that Dree had accelerated everything, and that the 5 days of nights at the window were over, and that the second most dangerous person in the annex had decided to stop being patient, which was, in a building that ran on the courage required not to give up, the most dangerous thing she could possibly have done. The evaluation window has been moved forward, Dree told him in the briefing cell, with the cradle freighter still venting coolant on the dome lock apron behind her. The specimen transfers to the Sarin Reach facility on tomorrow's cycle. Contractor Dulek ships out tonight, ahead of the transfer on a priority berth I've arranged personally. Her crest gleamed. I'm aware, Subwarden, of your escort arrangements. The night log is not as private as you and Keeper Vol appear to believe. I haven't disciplined it because until now it was harmless, a sentimental indulgence that kept the specimen quiet and cost the directorate nothing. But it ends tonight. The contractor ships out. The specimen transfers. And the annex returns to being a containment facility instead of the word cost her something. He could see it cost her something, and that was the most frightening part. A relationship. You're going to move him with her already gone, Merck said. Into a strange cradle off-world, to a facility full of strangers, with no shade and no window and no good night, and no fixed point in the entire Sarin Reach that he has ever once decided is his. I'm going to evaluate an asset clean. He is going to take your facility apart looking for her. He is going to be in a stasis cradle rated for a mass 3 times his. So were the collars, Merck said. So were the clamps, so was the pillar array. So was the demonstration glass, Director, which held only because a soft-world contractor put her hands on it and told him not to. You have a 9-year file of things rated to hold this animal, and the only thing that has ever actually held it is the one thing you're shipping out on a priority berth tonight. He did not raise his voice. He had never once in his career needed to. I am telling you, on the authority of 11 years as subwarden of this annex and 4 handlers I have signed the forms for, that if you move that beast off this world without that human, the cost will not be 4 handlers. It will be however many people are between the cradle and the last place he knew she was. That is not a threat, and it is not sentiment. It is the single most reliable prediction I have ever made in this building. Dree looked at him for a long moment. Her crest was very still. Noted, she said. The contractor ships out at the night bell. The transfer proceeds tomorrow. If you find you cannot execute these orders, Subwarden, I have a corps adjutant on the freighter who can. She stood. You've been on the floor too long, Merck. It's a known hazard of the posting. You've started to think the animal is a person. I'm going to do you the courtesy of writing tonight down as fatigue rather than insubordination. Don't make me revisit the classification. She left for the freighter, and Merck stood in the briefing cell in the last of the dome gold, and understood that the prediction he had just made was correct, and that it was going to happen anyway, because it was always going to be the one with the order, and that the only remaining question in the entire annex was whether the small human would be 140 measures away in a spaceport waiting area when it happened, or whether she would be at the window, where she belonged. telling the deadliest thing in the catalog that she had it handled. Merk keyed his comm. Vol, they're shipping her out at the Night Bell, the transfer's tomorrow. A pause. I need to know whose floor you're standing on, Keeper. And I need to know in the next 10 seconds, because I am about to do something that ends both our careers, and I will not do it to you without asking. Vol's answer came back without a tenth of a second's delay, in a voice that had stopped trembling. The floor's hers, Subwarden. It's been hers since the day she walked out on it with a mop. Tell me where to be. They took Wren to the spaceport at the Night Bell. Merk watched it on the annex feeds because he had arranged, very carefully, to be somewhere he could watch it and be seen watching it and be seen doing nothing. Because the thing he was about to do required Drees, adjutant, to believe that the Subwarden had folded. 2 directorate guards walked the small human out of the contractor block with a single kit bag and put her in a transit car, and she went the way she did everything, unhurried, no scene, no struggle, glancing once back at the annex dome where the beast was, and then getting in the car, because struggling had never once changed the sky and she knew exactly which things were sky and which things were not. The spaceport waiting area was 140 measures from the annex, across the open apron, under the same great fused glass dome, and the outbound labor rotation didn't lift until Avril's dawn, which gave the whole thing a margin of about 9 hours, and Merk had spent the afternoon learning, to the minute, exactly how much could be undone in 9 hours by 2 containment officers who had decided whose floor they stood on. The beast knew before the transit car cleared the apron. Merk had known it would. That was the whole terrible engine of the thing. He was watching the pit feed when it happened, and he saw the beast come up out of its shade, not resting, not deciding, the third thing, the thing the Corps had no file for and would need one now, and orient itself, unerring, toward the spaceport, toward the 140 measures of apron between it and the last direction its chosen ground had gone. It went to the pit wall. It put one forepaw against it. And Subwarden Merk, watching the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy begin, patiently and totally, to disagree with a wall that had held it for 9 years, keyed his comm one final time as a Subwarden of the conquered Containment Corps, and gave the last order of his career. Vol, it started. Get to the transit bay and get me a car. He was already moving, off the gantry, down the stairs, out toward the apron and the spaceport and the small human in the waiting area, who was the only thing in the Saren reach or anywhere else that could stop what 9 years of restraint had never managed to. I'm going to go get her. If the directorate wants to file it as insubordination, they can file it. But I am not going to stand on this gantry and watch this building learn the same lesson 4 handlers already died teaching, when the answer is sitting in a waiting area 140 measures away, wondering why nobody told her animal good night. The pit wall failed at the 2nd hour of Avril's night, and by then the annex was already empty of everyone with the sense to run, which was everyone but the 2 officers who had decided not to. It did not come apart the way the buyers had imagined a war beast would breach. No roar, no charge, no spectacle. Merk got the report from Vol over the comm as he crossed the apron, and Vol's voice was steady and appalled in equal measure, describing it. The beast had leaned on the wall until a seam gave, and then it had widened the seam with the patience of something that had all night, and then it had simply walked out of the pit that had held it for 9 years, unhurried, and started up the annex's main service spine toward the apron, toward the spaceport, toward the direction its ground had gone. And it had hurt no one. That was the part the directorate would never be able to file, the part Merk would spend the rest of his life making sure got said out loud in the right rooms. That the most dangerous war beast in the galaxy walked the length of the Kesarine annex in the dark. Through blast doors it took apart like wet paper, past 2 fleeing technicians and a jammed evacuation lift with 3 keepers trapped in it, and touched none of them. A keeper named Suze froze directly in its path in the main spine, too terrified to move, and the beast 9 years captive, 4 handlers deep, walking toward the only thing it had ever chosen, reached him and stopped and looked at him, and then went around. It went around. It had somewhere to be, and the somewhere was not this frightened keeper's throat. And it knew the difference, had always known the difference. And every handler who had ever died had died not because the beast could not tell the difference between a threat and a person, but because the Corps had spent 9 years insisting the beast was a weapon, and then acting surprised when a cornered predator defended itself from the people cornering it. "It's not hunting," Vol said over the comm, and Merrick could hear him understanding it as he said it. "Sub-Warden, it's not, it's going somewhere. It's tracking. It's going to the apron. It's going to her." "Then it's going the same place I am," Merrick said, "and it's faster than my car. Get everyone off the main spine and off the apron and out of the direct line between the pit and the spaceport. Not because it'll attack them, because it won't stop for them and it weighs what it weighs, and I will not sign a form for someone who stood in a doorway, a patient thing decided to walk through." He was at the spaceport perimeter now, the transit car screaming to a stop at the waiting area entrance, the great fused glass dome above him going from the flat silver of deep night to the first gray of the coming dawn. "Where's Dree?" A pause. "Main assembly hall, the big one under the dome center. She's had the freighter crew re-rig the terminal charge platform on the hall gantry. She's not going to let it reach the apron, Sub-Warden. She's going to take it in the hall." Merrick was already out of the car. Wren was sitting in the spaceport waiting area exactly where the Directorate guards had left her, kit bag at her feet, in the cold pre-dawn light of the outbound gate, and she was on her feet before Merrick cleared the door, because she'd felt it too, not the way the beast felt her. She was only a Death World predator, not a bonded one, but she'd felt the alarms and the running and the particular quality of a building coming apart, and she'd done the arithmetic in about the time it took him to reach her. They moved him. Not a question. Her face had gone very still, the stillness that in her species was not calm but the thing under calm. "They moved him and I wasn't there, and now he's loose and looking for me. He's in the main assembly hall, or he's about to be. Dree's rigged the terminal charge platform on the hall gantry. She's going to destroy him rather than let him reach the apron." Merrick was already turning, already moving, and the young human fell in beside him at that unhurried, total, endurance predator pace that covered ground the way weather covered ground, and he understood for the first time in his life what it must be like to be prey that had looked back and seen a human walking, and known, with perfect clarity, that the walking would not stop. "There's a service passage from the apron to the hall gantry. If we run it, we reach the gantry before she fires." "Maybe." "Then run it," Wren said. "And stop saying maybe. He's kept your whole building standing for 11 weeks on the strength of me being okay. I need to get where he can see that I'm okay before somebody with an order decides the answer is to kill him. That's the whole problem. That's been the whole problem the entire time. Every single thing that's gone wrong in this building has gone wrong because the people with orders would rather kill the thing they don't understand than stand next to it long enough to." She wasn't out of breath. She would not, Merrick suspected, be out of breath in an hour. "Run the passage. I'll keep up. Keeping up is the one thing my whole planet is for." They ran the passage. Behind them, ahead of them, all around them in the coming gray light, the annex groaned with the passage of something patient and enormous moving, toward the same point they were. And Merrick ran through a building coming apart beside a small, soft human from a mid-graded Death World, and understood that the Conquered had spent 31 years selling itself the story that humanity was harmless and obliging and priced correctly, and that the story was going to cost it someday. The way the story about the beast had cost it 4 handlers, because it was the same story, the exact same story, told about the same kind of thing. This is soft, this wants nothing, this can be managed. The beast had come off a grade 11 world and been mid-graded into a cage. The human had come off a grade 11 world and been mid-graded into a mop. And here they both were, at dawn, converging on a hall where a person who had never been on the floor was about to learn what the raw biosphere data had been trying to tell the registry for 31 years. Director Overseer Salon Dree stood on the assembly hall gantry with her hand on the terminal charge console and watched the galaxy's most dangerous war beast walk into the hall beneath her. And for the first time since she had arrived at the Kesarine vaults, she was afraid, and she was too disciplined to let it change what she did, which was the thing that nearly killed everyone. The hall was the largest space in the annex, a vaulted assembly floor directly under the center of the great fused glass dome, and the dome above it was going from gray to the first true gold of Avril's dawn as the beast came in through the ruined blast door at the far end. It came in unhurried. It came in tracking, its great flat head low and swinging, reading the hall for the fixed point it had crossed 9 years and a pit wall and half a facility to find. And the fixed point was not there, because the fixed point was still 40 measures away in a service passage. And Merk, bursting out onto the gantry at Dree's flank with Wren a half-step behind him, saw the beast not find the girl, and saw it go from tracking to the third thing, the thing with no file, and saw Dree's hand close on the console. Director, no. It's in the killing radius. Dree did not look at him. Her voice was steady. Her hand was steady. Everything about her was steady except that she was about to make the single largest mistake in the history of the annex, steadily. 0.4 seconds clean, no breach risk. This is the resolution, Subwarden. This is the only resolution there was ever going to be. I gave it every chance to be an asset, and it has spent one night proving it is exactly the liability I said it was on the first day. Stand back. It hasn't touched anyone, Merk said. It walked past 4 of your people in the dark. It went around a keeper who froze in its path. It is not a liability, Director. It is looking for the one person your order shipped off-world, and she is standing right. Here, said Wren Dulac, and stepped past both of them to the front of the gantry rail, into the first gold light coming down through the dome, and put both her small, soft hands flat on the rail where the beast could see them, and said, in the voice, the settling voice, the last warning voice, loud enough to fill the whole vaulted hall. Sonny. The beast's head came up. It came up out of the third stillness, the one with no file, and turned toward the gantry, toward the voice, toward the small figure in the first gold light with her hands flat on the rail, and Merk watched 9 years of conquered custody meet one human word and lose, cleanly, the way everything the conquered had built had lost to her from the first 3 seconds on the floor. The beast found the girl. Its whole enormous plated length reoriented around the finding, the way a compass reorients, the way water finds the low place, and the tracking went out of it and the third stillness went out of it, and there was left only the thing the Corps had spent 9 years and 4 handlers and 3 worlds' budgets trying and failing to produce, which was a war beast at rest, because its person had told it she was okay. Hey, Wren said, softer now, but the pickups caught it, the whole hall caught it, Dree caught it with her hand still on the console. Hey, I'm here, I'm okay. I'm sorry I wasn't at the window, that wasn't me. That's never going to be me again, you hear, I'm right here. She started for the gantry stairs. I'm coming down. Contractor Dulac. Dree's voice cracked across the hall. Her hand had not left the console. Do not enter the killing radius. That animal has breached full containment and traversed a facility. The terminal charge is armed. If you go down those stairs, I cannot guarantee. You armed a killing charge over a hall with 3 people standing in it, Wren said, stopping on the top stair. And for the first time since Merk had met her, there was something under the flat calm. Not fear, never fear, but its cold cousin, the thing a death world grows in place of fear, which is a total and unhurried contempt for the person who has mistaken the sky for a thing they control. You know what your problem is, all of you. It's not that you're cruel I could work with. It's that you're so afraid of the thing you don't understand that you'd rather kill it standing next to a live dome full of your own people than spend one night finding out you were wrong. You've had 9 years. 9 years to walk down to that pit and want nothing, and not one of you could stand the fear long enough to do it. So you built collars and platforms and killing radii and told yourselves the animal was the dangerous one. She looked at the console under Dree's hand. Take your hand off it, Director. Because either you fire it and you breach the dome, and the whole annex depressurizes and everyone in this hall dies including you, or you don't fire it, and you admit in front of your own record that the resolution was never the platform. It was always the janitor. And I know which one of those you're more afraid of. It's not the dying. The hall was silent except for the low sound the beast made, the rumble that came up through the floor, the sound Merrick had stopped being afraid of somewhere in the 4th week of the footage. Dree's hand stayed on the console. Merrick moved. He did not move to stop her physically. He was a containment officer, not a soldier, and he had learned everything he knew about stopping dangerous things from watching them not need to be stopped by force. He moved to the console beside her, and he put his own hand flat on the surface next to hers, not on the trigger, just beside it, and he said, in the flat register that had moved keepers off floors for 11 years, the truest thing he had ever said in the building. Director, I have been on this floor for 11 years. I have signed the forms for 4 people, and I am telling you, officer to officer, that if you fire that charge you will not be resolving a discrepancy. You will be the 5th handler. You will be the last person in a 9-year line who stood in front of this animal and decided that the answer to not understanding it was to make it stop existing. And the record will show, because she's right, the record is running. It's been running the whole time that you did it with the resolution standing on the stairs asking you not to. Take your hand off the console. Let her go down. And when it settles at her feet the way it has settled at her feet every night for 11 weeks, you will have your data. Clean data. The cleanest the Directorate has ever collected. It just won't be the data you came for. For a long moment Director Overseer Salin Dree stood with her hand on the terminal charge console, and the first full gold of Avril's dawn coming down through the great dome, and Merrick watched her fight the war that every person who has never been on the floor eventually has to fight, which is the war between the order and the thing in front of you. And he did not know, in that moment, which way it would go, because the whole terrible strength of people like Dree is that the order usually wins. She took her hand off the console. Go down, she said. Her voice was not steady anymore. That was the most human thing Merrick ever heard her say, and she was not human, and she would have hated the comparison. Go down, Contractor Dulac. Before I remember my orders. Wren went down. She went down the gantry stairs at that unhurried, total pace, into the hall, into the gold light, across the assembly floor toward the beast that had crossed a facility to find her. And Merrick gripped the rail and watched a small, soft contract laborer walk directly up to the deadliest thing in the Concord's catalog, with her hands loose at her sides. And the beast came to meet her, and lowered its great flat head, and pressed its brow into the middle of her chest exactly as it had on the first day. And she staggered half a step under the weight of it, and planted her feet, and reached up and scratched the ridge of scoot above its eye. And the whole hall let out a breath it had been holding for 9 years. There you are, Wren said. Big idiot, look at this place. You made another mess. The Concord budget adjutant had not, it turned out, gone home after the demonstration. Merrick learned this an hour after dawn, when the annex had been made safe. The beast settled in the assembly hall with Wren, unwilling to be more than a body's length from her, and no one, now, foolish enough to insist. And a transit car came down through the dome lock that was not a Directorate cutter, and out of it stepped the same Concord budget adjutant who had walked out of the weapons demonstration in silence and been assumed by everyone to have written the program off. He had not written it off. He had, it emerged, spent the intervening days doing the single thing no one in the Directorate had done in 9 years, which was reading the entire Kesarine file from the beginning, including the 11 weeks of facilities net footage, including the raw data, and he had come back not to reinstate a weapons program but to convene an inquiry. And he had come back angry, in the quiet, procedural, budget adjutant way, which was the most dangerous kind of angry the Concord produced. because it arrived with authority and paperwork, and no fear of a director-overseer's crest at all. His name was Assessor Kel Thren, and he stood in the doorway of the assembly hall and looked at the scene, the settled beast, the small human, the ruined blast doors, the terminal charge platform still armed on the gantry. And the first thing he said, to no one in particular, in the flat voice of a man reading a number he does not like, was, 9 years, 4 handlers, 3 worlds budgets, a breached facility, and the resolution has been a Tier 3 sanitation contractor the entire time, and it is in the file and no one read the file. He turned to Dree. Director Overseer, you will consider the weapons evaluation program suspended pending inquiry, and you will consider yourself a subject of it. Subwarden Merck, you will consider yourself a witness, and I will want the personal log, not the core log. I've been doing this long enough to know there's always a personal log. His eye moved to Wren, and to the beast at rest against her, and something in the flat adjutant's face did the involuntary lag that all their faces did, the small gap between what the eye reported and what the training permitted. And that I want explained to me slowly, by the only person in this facility who appears to understand it, and I want it explained before anyone else in this building makes one more decision about it. Because the decision-making in this building has cost the conquered 4 handlers and a war beast's worth of dignity, and I am here to stop the bleeding. Wren looked up from the beast. She had, Merck noticed, a smear of dome dust across one cheek and the exhausted flatness of someone who had run across a facility at dawn, and then held the deadliest thing in the catalog against her chest. And she looked at the assessor with the same mild, patient, unbothered steadiness she had looked at everyone with since the first day. The steadiness that Merck now understood was not calm but the death world under it. I can explain it slowly, she said, but you're not going to like it because it's not a technique and you can't buy it and you can't issue it on a lanyard. You ready? Go on. He's not a weapon, Wren said. He was never a weapon. He's a person-shaped hole where a weapon was supposed to be. And every single thing that's gone wrong in this building for 9 years happened because people kept trying to fill the hole with an order instead of just standing next to it. That's the whole explanation. He came off a world that would kill you for wanting something you hadn't earned, and you people wanted everything off him and earned none of it. And he did the only thing a creature from a world like that can do, which is refuse. 4 times. And now you're going to have an inquiry and write it all up and give my good knight a doctrine name. And at the end of it you're going to have exactly 1 useful sentence. So let me save you the quarter's budget. Stop trying to own the thing and it'll stop trying to leave. That's it. That's the finding. You want to weaponize something, weaponize that. The inquiry ran for 6 days, and Merck gave it the personal log, because Thren had been right that there was one. And because the time for keeping things instead of filing them was over. The whole disaster of the annex, he had come to understand, was a disaster of things kept when they should have been filed and things filed when they should have been understood, and he was done contributing to it. Thren worked the way the best of the conquered worked, which was slowly and without mercy and without heat, and he built, over 6 days, a record that no crest and no directorate authority was going to be able to talk its way out of. He put the 2 feeds up side by side, the containment feed and the facilities feed, synced now, and he made the inquiry watch 11 weeks of a human mopping a corridor and a war beast coming to a window. And he let the silence of the low-frame footage do the thing that no testimony could, which was to show a room full of conquered officers exactly how simple it had been, and exactly how long they had failed to see it. He put up the 9 years of restraint logs, generation after generation of rated systems failing at shorter and shorter intervals. And beside them, he put the single line from Wren's first day. He's trying to make a shadow. And he asked the assembled Corps and Directorate staff to explain to him why a Tier 3 contractor had produced, in 1 sentence, an operational insight that 9 years of funded study had not, and no one could. Because the answer was in the footage, and the answer was that she had looked and they had not. On the fourth day, Thren called Keeper Vol, and the annex learned what the 4 handlers had actually cost, from the one man who had carried the cost the longest. Vol had not wanted to testify. Merk knew that, because Vol had told him, the night before, standing at the unrated window in the dark, that he did not think he could sit in a bright room in front of a conquered inquiry and say out loud the thing he had understood on the day the third collar failed, because saying it out loud would make it true in a way that carrying it silently had not. And Merk had told him the only thing he had left to give a man in that condition, which was that the 4 handlers deserved to have the truth of what happened to them said by someone who had loved them, rather than filed by someone who had not, and that if Vol did not say it, then it would go into the record as 4 heroes killed by a monster, which was a lie, and the lie would kill a 5th thing, which was the beast, eventually, the next time the Conquered's nerve failed. And Vol had gone quiet and gone home, and come to the inquiry in the morning in a clean harness, and testified. He testified flatly, the way the Corps testified, because it was the only way he could get through it. He gave the inquiry the 4 names. He gave them the dates. He gave them the retrieval on the day 11 days before the breach, the one where there had been very little in the containers, and he did not flinch from the phrase, though Merk watched it cost him to say it in the daylight. And then Assessor Thren, who was a better officer than any of them in the way that mattered, did not ask Vol for the mechanics of the deaths, because the mechanics were in the file, and Thren did not make grieving men recite files. He asked Vol one question instead. Keeper Vol, you worked the specimen longer than any handler who survived it. In your judgment, not the Corps judgment, not the manuals, yours, why did those 4 handlers die? And Vol was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing he had told Merk he did not think he could say, and he said it looking at the 2 synced feeds still frozen on the display, the human at her window and the beast at its wall. Because we were afraid of it, Vol said, and it could smell that we were afraid of it, and on its world the thing that is afraid of you is the thing that is about to try to hurt you, because nothing on a world like that is afraid of you unless it has already decided it might have to kill you. We went down there afraid, every one of us, every shift, 9 years. We called it professional caution, and we wrote it into the approach protocols, and we told the young keepers to maintain it, and the whole time to the animal it read as exactly one thing. A predator that is frightened of me is a predator that is working up its nerve. So it never worked up it kept the initiative. 4 times, when a handler's fear finally tipped over into the thing fear tips into, a goad raised too fast, a collar cycled in a panic, a sudden move, the beast did what anything from its world does to a frightened thing that has finally moved on it. It moved first, and we buried the handler and wrote unprovoked in the file, and it was never once unprovoked. We provoked it every shift for 9 years just by being afraid, and it was patient with us far longer than anything from Karoth had any reason to be, and the 4 times it stopped being patient were the 4 times one of us stopped being able to hide the fear. He stopped. His harness clip did not tremble. I understood it the day the 3rd collar failed. It tracked me across the whole floor, and I thought it had marked me for later, and I found out months afterward from her that it was watching to see me reach the blast line safely. It was making sure the frightened keeper got clear. That was the animal we spent 9 years calling a monster. It was checking that I made the line. The inquiry was silent. Thren let the silence run, because Thren understood that some testimony had to be allowed to finish landing before the next word covered it over. One more, Keeper, Thren said at last. The contractor, Dulak. You have watched her with the specimen more than anyone in this room but the subwarden. What does she do that 4 trained handlers could not? Nothing, Vol said. That is the whole of it, Assessor, and it is the thing none of us could accept for the longest time because we had died learning to do so much. She does nothing. She is not afraid, so there is nothing for the animal to read as a threat, so there is no initiative for it to keep, so it puts the initiative down. That is all that has ever happened at that window. a creature that has held itself ready to kill for 9 years because everything that came to it was afraid, finally met something that wasn't and got to stop holding itself ready. She did not tame it, she let it off duty. It had been standing watch on its own life for 9 years, and she is the first thing that ever told it in a language it believed that it could stand down. He looked for the first time directly at Ren, across the bright room. I buried 4 good handlers. I am not going to pretend I have made my peace with the reason, but I would rather the record said the true thing than the kind thing, because the true thing is the only one that keeps it from happening again to it, or to the next one, or to her. We were the danger. It was the frightened one. And a janitor was braver than all 9 years of us, because she was the only one who didn't come to the window armed, even with fear. Merck entered Val's testimony into the record himself, word for word, in the column of things you keep, and did not once, in the transcribing of it, trust the 2 eyes he was reading with over the 2 he was not, because both of the ones he was not using were on Ren, who had listened to a grieving man absolve her of a bravery she did not think she had shown, and had not looked away, and had not said anything, because there was nothing to say that would not have taken something from him. And she had come to that window from the first night, wanting to take nothing from anyone. Dree fought it. Merck had expected nothing less. People like Dree did not stop fighting because they were wrong. They stopped fighting because they were out of authority, and Dree still had authority. She fought it well. She conceded the beast was not directable by protocol. She had no choice. The record was overwhelming. And then she pivoted cleanly to the position Merck had been dreading since the demonstration, the position that was going to be the actual danger of the whole inquiry, because it was reasonable, and it was efficient, and it was built on exactly the same wrong premise as everything else. Then the asset is not the specimen, Dree told the inquiry. The asset is the interface. We have established, at a cost I will not defend but also will not pretend away, that specimen 9 is controllable by exactly one variable, and that variable is a human. Very well. The Directorate does not need to own the beast. The Directorate needs to own the human. Contractor Dulac has a demonstrated, unique, strategically significant capability. I move that her contract be elevated from the Nabatine subcontract to a direct Directorate engagement, that she be relocated to a secure facility with the specimen, and that the pairing be evaluated as a unit. We keep the capability. We simply acquire the correct component. And there it was. 9 years later, 1 facility breach later, 4 handlers later, and the Directorate's answer was to make the exact same decision 1 layer up, to look at the one thing in the building that could not be owned, and decide to own it. Merck opened his mouth. Thren lifted one hand, a small gesture, and Merck closed it, because Thren had a better weapon than argument, and Merck realized what it was a half-second before the assessor deployed it. Before the inquiry votes on the Director-Overseer's motion, Thren said, it should have the complete file on the proposed component. Contractor Dulac W species, human, homeworld, Earth. Registry biosphere grade, he paused, and Merck understood that Thren had done the same cross-reference he had done, alone in the dark, and had come to the same place, filed as 4, mid-grade, no strategic interest. That is the summary number the registry has carried for 31 years. He let it sit. I had the raw data reassessed this week by 3 independent survey contractors because the summary number did not match the footage. A creature graded 4 does not walk up to a grade 11 apex predator and correct its containment officer's threat assessment, so I had it looked at. He put the reassessment on the display. Earth is not a grade 4 world, Thren said. The original survey was a fast pass, and it was fooled by the single most dangerous thing about the species, which is that they are friendly. The survey team was greeted with disarming warmth and a gift of cooked food, and it wrote down harmless, because it never occurred to a conquered contractor that a thing could be both warm and lethal at the same time, that the warmth might not be the opposite of the danger but the thing the danger wears. Reassessed against the raw biosphere data, Earth grades no lower than 10, and 2 of the 3 contractors argued for 11. High gravity, killing weather. 5 recorded mass extinctions with survivors each time. And a dominant species that hunts by endurance, that does not overpower its prey and does not outrun it, but simply follows it, patiently, at an unhurried and total pace, across distances that kill everything else, until the prey's heart fails and the human, still walking, arrives. Thren looked at Dree. The director-overseer has moved that we acquire this human. I would like the inquiry to sit for one moment with what that footage actually shows. It does not show a war beast that has been tamed by a soft-world laborer. It shows 2 apex predators from 2 separate death worlds recognizing each other through a pane of glass and choosing of their own accord to be gentle. The beast did not submit to Contractor Dulac. It recognized her. And I would remind the director-overseer that her entire program failed for 9 years for one reason, because you cannot own an apex predator. You can only, if you are very lucky and very humble, be chosen by one. We have now proposed to make the identical mistake with a second one. The only difference is that this one sold us her stories and mopped our floors, so we mistook her for safe. The inquiry was very quiet. There are, Thren added into the quiet in the flat voice of a budget adjutant reading a number he did not like at all, roughly 900,000 humans currently under subcontract across conquered space. Sanitation, agriculture, hazard labor, the jobs the member species priced themselves out of. Every one of them graded harmless on the strength of a survey that a species of endurance predators fooled with a warm greeting and a hot meal. I raise this not to alarm the inquiry. I raise it because the director-overseer's motion, acquire the human, relocate her against her will, evaluate the pairing as a unit, is a motion to do to a member of that species precisely what we spent 9 years doing to the specimen, and I would like us all to be very clear before we vote about what we learned this week happens when you try to own a thing from a world like that against its will. He turned to Wren. Contractor Dulac, the director-overseer has moved to acquire you. You have the floor. What would you like to say to the motion? Wren, who had sat through 6 days of inquiry in her too large gray coverall with the same unbothered patience she brought to a floor, looked at the room full of crests and authority and reassessed biosphere grades, and then she looked at Dree, and Merrick braced for the contempt, the cold death world cousin of anger she'd shown on the gantry, and it did not come. What came instead was worse, and quieter, and it was the thing that ended the motion more completely than any argument Thren could have made. I'd like to say I understand her, Wren said. That's all. I understand the director. She's scared. She's been scared this whole time of him, of me, of the number being wrong, of the file she didn't read. And where I'm from, we've got a lot of practice with scared, because the sky's always trying to kill you and you learn early that the scared ones are the ones who make it worse. Always, every time, because scared people reach for the order instead of the animal. I don't hate her for it. I feel sorry for her. She stood. But here's the thing she still hasn't heard, 6 days in, so I'll say it slow. You can't acquire me. Not because I'll fight you, I won't. Fighting's a fear that found a direction, and I don't carry the fear. You can't acquire me because the exact second you own me, I'm not the thing that settles him anymore. The whole reason it works is that I don't want anything from him and nobody's making me be there. You put me in a secure facility as a directorate component and make me his handler, and I become handler number 5, and you already know how that ends. You cannot own the thing that only works when it's free. That's not me being difficult. That's just the physics of it, the same physics that killed 4 of your people, and you can write it up and grade it and doctrine it all you want, and it will still be true tomorrow. The janitor works because she's a janitor. The day you promote her to weapon, you don't have a weapon, you have a 5th container. She sat back down. Vote however you want, but that's the physics. The inquiry voted, the motion failed. Merrick watched Director-Overseer Salin Dree lose, procedurally in the record, in front of the authority she could not outcrest, and it was nothing like the way the buyers had imagined a war beast's danger. No roar, no spectacle, just a small tired human explaining the physics of freedom to a room that had spent 9 years insisting freedom was a containment failure, and the room at last, having read the file, believing her. Assessor Thren's findings ran to 40 pages, and Merck read every one of them. And the thing he noticed, the thing that told him the conquered might actually survive the lesson, was that the findings did not once use the word asset. Specimen 9 was reclassified. It ceased on the authority of the inquiry to be a weapons evaluation subject, a directorate holding, a line item, or an asset of any kind, and became, the classification did not quite exist yet, so Thren invented it in the flat language of a man who had decided to stop the bleeding. A recognized sapient-adjacent non-combatant resident under conquered protection, which was 30 words of bureaucracy that meant. When Merck translated it into the only language that had ever mattered in the annex, they are going to stop trying to own him. The weapons program was closed. The 3 worlds' budgets were written off, formally, in the record, as the cost of a lesson the conquered should have learned from the file for free. And the terminal charge platform was removed from the annex and returned to the Directorate Armory, and Merck personally signed the transfer, and it was the only form he had ever enjoyed signing. Dree was not destroyed. Merck had half wanted her destroyed, in the small, ungenerous part of himself he was not proud of, and Thren did not destroy her, because Thren was a better officer than Merck in exactly the way that mattered, which was that he understood the difference between punishing a person and correcting an error. Dree was relieved of the Kessarine program and reassigned to a Directorate Logistics post 3 sectors away, a demotion dressed as a lateral move, and on her last day at the annex, she came to the assembly hall where the beast now rested, and she stood at a careful distance and looked at it for a long time, and Merck, who happened to be there, watched her do the thing he had noted she never did on the first day. She looked at the pit. She looked at the animal. She let her eye report what it reported and did not overrule it with the training, and whatever she saw, she carried it away with her to the logistics post 3 sectors away, and Merck never saw her again, and hoped, without much conviction, that somewhere on that far quiet posting, she had finally understood that the most expensive line item in any budget is not sentiment. It is the refusal to read the file. The hard problem, once the classifications were settled, was the shade. Because the promise still stood. Wren had made it on the demonstration gantry with her hands on the glass. Nobody moves you again. And the inquiry had, without quite meaning to, made it conquered policy. Because a recognized non-combatant resident under protection could not be shipped to the Sarin Reach for evaluation any more than it could be collared. And so the beast was going to stay on Avril, in the Kessarine vaults, in the great fused glass dome that had been built to make it feel skinned. And that was not a home. That was just a nicer cage. And Merck had not signed all those forms and lost the courage to give up 4 times over to leave the animal in a room that hurt it in a different way. So they built it a shadow. It was Val's idea, which pleased Merck more than he expected, because Val had put 4 handlers in the ground and had earned, more than anyone, the right to be the one who figured out how to keep the 5th danger from ever coming. Val took the beast's old pit, the one it had breached, the one with the wrecked pillars, and he did not repair it. He roofed it. He brought in the annex's structural crews, and he built over the open pit a low dark vault of Karathi analog stone, unlit, close-ceilinged, a made cavern shade you could put your back into. Dark you could disappear a body the length of a transit car inside of, with a single wide mouth that opened onto a small daylit yard where the beast could come out into Avril's noon if it chose to, and more to the point, could choose not to. They gave it, in short, the one thing 9 years of study had never thought to give it, which was a choice about the light. And they built, at the dark mouth of the vault, a small alcove with a window of ordinary unrated glass, at a human's height, with a sill wide enough to set a corner of a ration block on, because Wren had told them once quietly, what the window was for, and this time somebody had written it down in the column of things you keep instead of the column of things you file. The first time they opened the vault and let the beast into its dark, Merrick watched it walk into the shade and stop, in the middle of the made cavern, out of the light at last, and lower itself down, and let out a breath that came up through the floor pickups as a long, low rumble he had never heard from it before in 9 years, because he had never once given it a reason to make it. It put its back against the dark stone. It closed its eyes. And in 11 years as sub-warden of a containment facility, Merrick had never seen a specimen do the thing this one did in its first hour of real shade, which was simply to rest, all the way, with nothing left in it deciding. "That's the first time," Wren said beside him at the unrated window. 9 years. That's the first time he's ever put his back against something and not had to keep one eye on the door. She was quiet a moment. "You did a good thing building him a dark. I want you to know that. I know it doesn't fit your paperwork, a containment officer building a dangerous animal somewhere to hide. But it's the first thing anybody in this building ever did for him instead of to him, and I'm not going to forget it, and neither is he." "He remembers," Merrick said. "It was not a question either. He remembers everything. That's what none of you ever got. He remembered 11 weeks of a window. He remembered 9 years of collars. He remembers which ones of you went around the frozen keeper and which ones of you reached for the platform." She looked at Merrick. "He's going to remember you built him a shadow. On his world, that's the whole of what love is, not the big feeling, the shade you build somebody so they can finally put their back down." Wren did not become a directorate component, or a core handler, or a recognized anything. Merrick made sure of it, and Thren made sure of it, and in the end the thing that made most sure of it was Wren herself, who declined every elevation the grateful and terrified Concord tried to hang on her over the following weeks the way she declined everything, by finishing her tea and going back to her floors. She kept her contract. That was the part that the Concord could never quite metabolize, the part that got written up in 3 separate cultural affairs memos and understood by none of them. That they offered her rank, credits, a directorate engagement, a title, a place in the record, and she took a renewed Tier 3 sanitation contract with Nabatine Facilities Group, corridors and drains, 40-hour cycle, with one added clause that Merrick drafted personally, and that Nabatine signed without understanding why a sub-warden of the Containment Corps cared about the shift schedule of a janitor, the clause being: contractor's route to include the East Run alcove, nightly, end of shift, in perpetuity, non-transferable, non-cancelable, except at contractor's own election. She had made them write her good night into a contract. Merrick thought it was the funniest and finest thing anyone had done in the annex in 11 years, and he never told her he thought so, because she'd have finished her tea and gone back to her floors, and that was, he had come to understand, the entire point of her. The Concord, meanwhile, quietly began to read a file it had carried unread for 31 years. It did not announce it. The Concord did not announce mistakes of that size. It simply, in the way of very old institutions, began to behave differently and pretend it always had. Thren's reassessment of Earth from grade 4 to grade 10 or higher did not appear in any bulletin, but the survey division quietly opened a regrading program for every soft world client species that had been rated on a fast pass, starting with the ones that had greeted their survey teams warmly, because warmth, Thren's findings noted in a single dry line that Merrick suspected would outlive them all, is not the opposite of danger. In the species that matter, it is the shape danger takes when it has decided, for its own reasons, to be kind. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the Concord, a clerk began the slow work of recataloguing 900,000 humans from harmless to unknown, one contract at a time, and Merrick did not envy the clerk, and did not entirely pity the Concord, because the Concord had made this bed itself, 31 years ago, when it looked at a species that hunted by never, ever stopping, and wrote down obliging. He thought about that sometimes on the gantry, watching the annex go about the changed business of stewarding a thing it had spent 9 years failing to own. 900,000 of them, mopping the floors, growing the food, doing the hazard work the member species had priced themselves out of, selling everyone their stories in enormous volume cheaply to anyone who'd take them. And Merck had started lately to wonder about the stories, about why a species that hunted by patience would sell its stories to everyone it met, and whether that too was a survey team's harmless misread, and whether somewhere in 900,000 contracts worth of human stories the whole galaxy had been told, warmly, over and over. In a hot meal and a friendly greeting and a tale traded cheap at the end of a shift, exactly what humanity was, and had written down miscellaneous cultural, and had not read the file. The annex learned the last of it 4 months later. On the morning the West Atmosphere processor ruptured, and it learned it the way it had learned everything worth knowing since the human walked onto the floor with a mop, which was by being wrong about the beast one final time and being corrected. Merck was on the gantry when the processor went. The Kesarine vaults were old and the processors older, and one of the great fused glass panels of the dome had been carrying a hairline stress fracture that the maintenance schedule had flagged as low priority. And low priority on an old station is a countdown nobody hears. And at the top of the morning shift, the panel let go, and the pressure differential took a section of the west dome and the structure beneath it. And the structure beneath it was the beast's yard. The small daylit yard outside the dark vault, and Keeper Vol was in it. He had been at the unrated window. He was there most mornings now. That was the thing the annex had quietly become, a place where the keepers who had once counted the containers now came to the alcove and looked in at the resting beast the way you look in on something you had wronged and were slowly being forgiven by. And Vol came most of all, because Vol had the most to be forgiven. He was at the alcove with a maintenance kit, resealing the sill, when the west dome let go, and the collapse came down across the yard and the vault mouth and Keeper Vol and buried him. The annex alarms went to the tone Merck had heard exactly once before, on the day the third collar failed, and he was moving before the tone finished, down off the gantry, keying the emergency channel, and the reports came in fragmented and rising. Dome breach west quadrant, structural collapse over the resident vault, atmosphere venting, one keeper unaccounted for, last logged position the eastern alcove. And then the report that stopped every officer on the channel cold, the report that 4 months of a changed annex had not, it turned out, entirely untaught them to fear. The keeper was down inside the collapse, and the resident was in there with him, in the dark, in the vault. A body the length of a transit car and a buried, injured keeper together, in the one place in the annex where no camera reached because they had built it dark on purpose, and the whole 9 years came flooding back up into the annex's throat, 4 handlers deep, and Merck heard a young keeper on the channel say, in a voice gone thin with it, "He's in there with 9, he's hurt and he's in the dark with 9. Somebody get the," and stop, because there was no platform anymore. Merck had signed it back to the armory himself, and there was no collar and no clamp and no lattice. And for one long, terrible breath, the annex stood at the edge of the collapse in the venting morning air and confronted the thing it had spent 4 months believing it had made peace with, which was a wounded man alone in the dark, with the deadliest thing in the catalog. "Everyone hold," Merck said on the channel flat, the register that moved people when the alternative was screaming. "Nobody enters the collapse. Nobody. Get me Ren." "She's already coming," someone said. She was already coming. Of course she was already coming. She had felt it the way she felt everything, and she came across the annex at that unhurried, total pace in her gray coverall, and Merck met her at the edge of the collapse where the west dome had come down across the vault mouth in a slope of shattered Karathi stone and fused glass, with the morning air venting thin and cold past them toward the breach, and a keeper trapped somewhere in the dark on the other side of it, and the resident in there with him. "Vol's inside," Merck said, "injured, position unknown, 9 is in there with him. He made himself say it. There's no way to control the outcome, Ren, not anymore. We took all the systems out. Whatever's happening in that dark is happening, and we can't reach it, and we can't see it, and I need to know if I'm about to sign a fifth form. Ren looked at the collapse. She looked at the dark mouth of the vault where it still stood open past the fallen stone, the dark they had built so the beast could finally put its back down. And she did the single most incomprehensible thing anyone on that edge had ever seen a living creature do in the presence of a wounded man alone with Specimen 9, which was the same thing she had done on the very first day. She sighed. "You're still doing it," she said. 4 months and a whole inquiry, and you're still standing at the edge of the dark going, what if the monster? Merk, she said his name gently, the settling voice, and it landed on him the way it landed on the beast, and he understood for the first time that she had been using it on all of them the whole time, the whole annex, that they had all been, in their way, a scared animal from a world that hurt them, and she had been telling every one of them you're okay in the only language that ever worked, which was patience. Val isn't alone in the dark with a monster. Val is hurt in a collapse with the one thing in this building strong enough to hold a dome off him and gentle enough to know he's the good kind of frightened. You want to know what's happening in that dark? I'll tell you, and then I'll go get them both. She was already moving toward the vault mouth. He's keeping it off him. That's what's happening. He's got his back to the stone and Val under his chest, and he's holding the whole west dome up off a keeper who used to bury the people this building was scared of, and he's waiting. He's waiting for the one thing that's kept this whole building standing for 4 months to come tell him she's got it handled. So I'm going to go in there and tell him. She looked back at Merk once. Nobody follows me, not because it's dangerous. Because he's concentrating, and I'd rather he didn't have to keep one eye on your door. She went into the dark. Merk stood at the edge of the collapse in the venting morning light, and did the hardest thing his career had ever asked of him, which was nothing, which was to stand and hold the channel and let a small, soft human walk alone into a lightless vault where a wounded keeper lay under the deadliest thing in the catalog, and trust, on 11 weeks of footage and 4 months of a rebuilt annex and one side sentence, that the thing in the dark was not a monster and had never been a monster and had only ever been a person-shaped hole where a weapon was supposed to be, waiting to be told it was okay. The channel was silent. The morning air vented past him toward the breach. And then from inside the dark, faint on the alcove pickup that still barely worked, came Ren's voice, thin and unbothered and gentle, the good-night voice, the one she'd written into a contract in perpetuity. "There you are, big idiot, look what you're holding up. Okay, I've got him now, you can let the others come. I've got him, you did so good. You did so good, Sonny, I've got him, let them come." And Subwarden Merk, at the edge of the dark, gave the last order of the morning, and it was the easiest one he had ever given, because, for the first time in his 11 years at the Kesarine vaults, he gave it without any fear at all. "Rescue crews, into the vault, go, he's holding it up for you, go." They got Val out. He had a crushed foreleg and 3 cracked plates, and he was alive, entirely alive, because a body the length of a transit car had put its back to the collapsing stone and its chest over a wounded man, and held the west dome of the Kesarine vaults off him for 11 minutes in the dark, and had not moved, had not thrashed, had done the patient total thing it did with everything. Only this time the thing it was leaning against was the weight that would have killed the 5th handler. And it leaned against that just as patiently as it had once leaned against the walls, until its person came into the dark and told it she had him, and it let the rescuers in, and it never once, in 11 minutes with a frightened, wounded man beneath it, gave anyone a single reason to reach for a platform that was no longer there. Keeper Val came back to the annex on a mending brace 40 days later, and the first thing he did, before he reported to Merk, before he logged a single form, was go down to the eastern alcove and stand at the unrated window and look in at the dark where the resident lay against the stone, and say something to it that no pickup caught and Merrick never asked about. Because some things you file and some things you keep, and Merrick had finally, at 60, learned to tell the difference by the look on a man's face when he came away from a window. Val changed after that. They all did, but Val most of all, because Val had been the one in the dark. He stopped flinching at the resident's tracking gaze, because he understood now what he had never understood on the day the third collar failed, that the gaze had never been a threat assessment but a welfare check. The beast counting the keepers the way a shepherd counts a flock it is too proud to admit it has adopted. And slowly, over the following months, the resident began to tolerate the keepers in a way it had never tolerated a handler. Not because they had found the correct protocol, they had thrown the protocols out, but because Wren was there and the beast trusted Wren, and Wren trusted the keepers. And trust, it turned out, was the one thing in the annex that ran downhill. The beast would let Val sit in the alcove now. It would let Merrick stand at the vault mouth. It would not let either of them do a single thing it did not want done, and it made a body length of dark stone available to any keeper who came in peace, and none at all to anyone who came wanting. And the difference between those two, which 9 years of study had never once managed to teach a handler, every keeper in the annex now understood in their spine, because they had watched a janitor draw the line with a mop and a corner of her lunch, and the simple refusal to be afraid. The Corps rewrote the manual. Of course it rewrote the manual. It was the one thing the conquered could always be relied upon to do. But this time Merrick made sure the rewrite was done by people who had been in the dark, and the new manual for the stewardship of recognized non-combatant residents was a strange, short, humble document, and the first line of it. Merrick wrote the first line himself and fought the review board to keep it, and one was not a protocol at all. It was the thing Wren had said in the briefing cell on the first day, printed plain, with no doctrine name attached to it because it had refused every doctrine name they'd tried, the way she had. You people set the bar so low a janitor tripped over it. Raise the bar, want nothing, begin there. Thren came back once, a year on, to close the inquiry's final file, and he found the annex he had first walked into unrecognizable, not rebuilt. The west dome was still under repair. The wrecked pillars were still down in the roofed vault where the beast preferred them, but changed, in the way a place changes when the fear goes out of it. He stood on the gantry with Merrick and watched the resident come out of its dark into the small daylit yard, into Avril's noon of its own choice, because it could go back into the shade whenever it wanted, and so the light had stopped being a wound. And he watched the small human sitting on an overturned bucket at the edge of the yard doing nothing at all, just being there, being okay, while a grade 11 apex predator dozed in the sun a body's length away because she was. And Thren said, after a while, in the flat voice of a man who had spent his life reading numbers, "We nearly killed it, 4 times over, and it was never anything but a creature waiting to be treated like one." "Yes," Merrick said. "The whole galaxy runs on the same mistake." Thren was quiet a moment. "We meet a thing we don't understand, and we're so afraid of not controlling it that we reach for the collar before we ever reach for the question. 9 years, and the answer was hello." He shook his head slowly. "I've filed a lot of findings, Subwarden. That's the only one I'm going to remember. The most dangerous thing in the catalog, and the thing that gentled it wasn't a weapon or a lever or a better cage. It was a young woman from a death world we mislabeled, who wanted nothing and said hello and kept her word. There's no protocol for it. I tried to write one. It kept coming out as a description of her." "There's no protocol for it," Merrick agreed. "You can't issue courage on a lanyard, and you can't issue the lack of fear either. You can only hire it by accident, at contractor rates, and hope you notice before it walks onto the floor." Down in the yard, the resident stirred and rolled, and put its great flat head across the small human's lap in the noon light, and she scratched the ridge of scoot above its eye without looking up from the nothing she was doing. And the deadliest thing in the Concord's catalog let out the long, low rumble that Merrick had once been afraid of, and had learned, over a year, to hear as the only entirely uncomplicated happiness left in the building. Merck put in his retirement papers at the end of that year. 11 years as subwarden of the Kesarine vaults, 61 now, a poor sleeper still but for different reasons, and he handed the annex to Val, who had earned it in the dark. And the last evening before he left, he walked the East Run one final time, the way he had walked it 1,000 times, and he came to the alcove at the end of it at the hour when the dome light went the deep gold of Avril's late afternoon, and then began to fade toward the short night. Wren was there. She was always there at that hour. It was in her contract, in perpetuity, non-cancelable except at her own election, and she had never once elected. Her shift was done. Her mop was propped against the unrated window. She was standing at the glass looking in at the dark where the resident lay against the Karathi stone, its back down, both eyes shut, at rest in the shadow they had finally built it, and she did not turn when Merck came up beside her, because she had felt him coming the way she felt everything. "Last one," she said. "They told me you're off in the morning." "Off in the morning," Merck said. They stood at the window a while. The dome light faded. Down in the dark the resident breathed, slow and enormous and unafraid, a grade 11 predator with its back against the stone and no reason left in all of conquered space to keep one eye on the door. "You want to know the thing I never told the inquiry," Wren said. "The thing I never wrote down." She was quiet a moment. "When I started this contract, back in March, before any of it, the first night I stopped at his window and said hello, I wasn't being brave, and I wasn't being kind, and I hadn't figured out any of the stuff about death worlds and endurance and wanting nothing. That's all true, but it came later. That first night it was just this. I was tired, and it was the end of a long shift on a station full of people who looked straight through me because I was the help, and I came around the corner and there was this enormous, terrible, lonely thing in a room full of light that hurt it, and it looked at me." She put her hand flat on the glass. "And it was the only thing in the whole building that saw me. That's it. That's the big secret. Two nobodies at a window. He was the galaxy's most dangerous war beast, and I was a janitor nobody vetted, and we were the only two things in the Kesarine vaults that nobody had bothered to actually look at, and we looked at each other, and that was enough. That was always enough. It was enough for 9 years he never got, and it was enough the first night he finally did." She took her hand off the glass. "You can't put that in a manual either, believe me." Thren tried. Merck looked at the small human, and at the resting beast in the dark beyond the glass, and at the last of the gold going out of the great dome that had been built to make a killer feel skinned, and had instead, in the end, become the roof over the one place in conquered space where the deadliest thing in the catalog had learned to put its back down, and he found he had nothing to add, because everything worth saying about the Kesarine vaults had been said on the first day by a tired contractor with a mop, and repeated every night since in 6 words at a window, and he was, at 61, wise enough at last to know when a thing was finished. Wren picked up her mop. She turned to the glass one final time in the fading light, the way she had 11 weeks and a year and a lifetime of shifts, and she said the 6 words she had written into a contract in perpetuity, soft, unbothered, meaning them all the way down with no fear underneath taking a cut. The last warning the galaxy's most dangerous war beast would ever need, and the only one it had ever wanted. "Good night, big idiot, sleep in your shadow." And in the dark it had finally been given. The deadliest thing the conquered had ever caught let out its long, low breath, and slept, and did not keep one eye on the door.